Good evening. Oops, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. Welcome to the meeting and welcome back to the council chamber. Please note that the console equipment shall only be used to request to speak today. Votes will be done by the show of hands. You will also have received a guidance note for the use of console, but a reminder, please only press the button to request to speak, and not again unless you wish to remove yourself from the green speaker list. Once you have requested to speak, your microphone will turn green. Your microphone will turn red and switch on automatically when it is your turn to speak. I hope you got the gist of all that. I'd also, just before I start, would just like to congratulate Councillor Mel Stevenson. Wherever she is, she's there. She kept that quiet. She's getting married on Monday. Everybody wants to know that. Okay. I broadcasted it worldwide, Mel. We have a full agenda this evening, and I would also like to remind members to be mindful this when making contributions to the meeting. I intend to schedule a break at 6:45 prior to the key discussion item commencing at 7 p.m. I would like now to make the following statement as regards to the recent floods in Pakistan. In recent weeks, Pakistan has been hit by devastating floods. It is estimated that more than 1,000 people have lost their lives. A further 33 million people have been affected by the flooding, and it's estimated that 1/3 of the entire country is currently underwater. That's as though the whole of Britain or England is underwater. The scale of the disaster is horrendous, and the conditions in the country are likely to get even worse as rains continue. Many of our friends, neighbours and colleagues here in Kirklees have deep connections in Pakistan. On behalf of the council, I express my condolences to anyone who has lost loved ones, and I also want to convey our support to those family and friends who have been affected. Many charities and organisations are working hard to save lives and rebuild the country now. Anyone who wishes to support the relief effort can go to the Disasters Emergency Committee website to donate. Thank you. Thank you. Announcements by the Chief Exec.
Hi everyone, I'd just like to give notice that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority elected Mayor will be attending the meeting of Council on the 7th of December. So this meeting will now be a key discussion meeting. The holding executive to account meeting that was due on that day will be moved to the 9th of November. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence? Councillor Smith.
And Mark Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sokal.
The apology from Councillor Farhan Pare and Councillor Manisha Kaushik and Councillor Afaq, but will be here a bit late. Yeah, both of them. Yeah, coming late.
Thank you. Any other apologies?
Can I give apologies for Councillor Warner, please?
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. That's carried. Yes. Sorry. It's my first time in the chamber, Councillor, but thank you for highlighting that to me as well. Thank you. Please. Thank you. That's carried. Item 4, declarations of interest. Members who have any disclosable pecuniary interest which would prevent them from discussing or voting on any item should disclose their interest now. Are there interests to declare? No. Item 5, petitions from the members of the council. Yes, Councillor Zaman. You need to press the button here.
On behalf of Batley East councillors, that's been presented to us from Brown's Place and Hamza Street in Batley, and it's regarding a business that's operated from the residents' backyard without permission. So I'll present that.
Councillor Pinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a petition from the residents of Oakenshaw who are asking that the cross, which was taken down earlier this year following being hit by a lorry, should be restored to its original place. The council hasn't made a decision yet, but the residents there are making the point that it should go back where it came from, because that's where it's always been since the early 18th century.
So 700 people.
Yeah, thank you. In accordance, in accordance with Council Procedure Rule 9.3, I direct the subject matter of the petitions be referred to the appropriate service director for investigation. Thank you. Item 6, petitions from members of the public. We have one deputation this evening. Please can I invite the Community Road Safety Group to please come forward and present their deputation. Sorry, Councillor Bolt.
Point of order. We have a deputation dealing with road safety and speeding. In accordance with Council Procedure Rule number 15.3, we also have on the agenda a motion to debate this. Could I request that the motion is brought forward after the deputation so the residents can hear our debate on something they have a great interest in? I propose that, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody second that? Councillor Bolt, there was a discussion on this at the all-party members' briefing with all the leaders and decided. Yeah, that was that. But we'll take a vote on this. Please. For those for. Those against. That's carried.
No, it's not.
Sorry, I beg, not carried. I do apologise. Not carried. Any abstentions? Yeah. Thank you. Can I have the meeting? That's fallen. Can I have the deputation, please?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Veronica Wooling, and I'm here to represent our Community Road Safety Group in Murfield. Scattered around on your desks and things, you'll see a little pack of laminates like this, which are photographs of some of the incidences that I just want to draw your attention to. As we say, a picture tells 1,000 words, so it'll mean that I'm a little bit briefer. So you should be able to find them. So thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors, for allowing us this deputation and presenting our petition. All in all, we've had well over 100 signatures on our petitions, which, considering we're quite a small community, I delivered 120 leaflets over the weekend, inviting people to come along tonight. So it's a big percentage of our community that have signed this petition. On your leaflets there, on your laminates, you'll see a letter from a young lady called Daisy. Daisy's only 8 years old. She was going to come and do a deputation this evening because this whole thing started for us when Daisy's cat was knocked down on Granny Lane. She was very upset. She wrote a letter to Councillor Bolt, which I've laminated for you. However, she's had a little bit of a back-to-school meltdown today, so she can't be with us. She just doesn't feel like coming. So when you see Daisy's letter, you'll know why. So we were galvanising to taking action, enforcing speed limits when Daisy's cat was run over and killed in March last year. And like many residents in issues like this, we did a lot of talking, but no action. People would say, oh, we need speed bumps, oh, we need traffic calming, but nobody actually did anything. So we grasped this issue by the horns and decided, let's do it, and let's get a petition together, let's see what we can do. As we've said, we're increasingly concerned for the safety of road users by some inconsiderate drivers and some valid drivers who are just in a bit of a hurry. Quite often they use our lanes to cut through to avoid queuing on Huddersfield Road. We're asking for measures to be taken to enforce the 30-mile-per-hour speed limit. Unfortunately, if you travel east to west on Granny Lane and Stannard Lane from Shepley Bridge, there isn't actually a speed limit sign there. So people entering don't even know what the speed limit is. So it's difficult to keep to it if you don't know what it is. However, cars regularly drive well over the speed limit, and during the evenings and later on, very much above the speed limit, and this was when Daisy's cat was knocked down. I've received a response from Greg Fullerton, Highways Department, on our online petition, and he tells us that 30 miles per hour is appropriate for this area, and we don't disagree with that, but we just need to think that it needs to be enforced in some way. So we think that we should have a one-way traffic system on the very narrow lanes, which are literally one lane, because you'll see from your pictures, cars have to mount the pavement to give way to traffic travelling on the riverside. And if you're a pedestrian on a very narrow pathway and that happens, it's really frightening. Me and my husband often sort of have to go up against the wall like that to let the cars through. In general, there's a great lack of warning signs, warning drivers of pedestrians, of farm vehicles, of animals, cyclists. There are no signs like this. There is one sign, east to west, leaving Shepley Bridge, which shows the right-of-way, but it's obscured. So you don't know who's got right-of-way. So, as well as our petition, we've also spoken to Miller Homes, who are developing the 67 homes on Granny Lane, and they're very supportive of our traffic calming campaign as well, and they want to keep them informed as to how it's going on. So what we suggest is perhaps a collaboration between ourselves, Murfield Town Council, Kirklees Council and Miller Homes.
Sorry to interrupt you, but you've got 30 seconds.
All right, okay. Right, just a minute. I've just got Ian just say something.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be brief. I'm Ian Woolin.
Mill Street, East and West Town.
I just want to add a bit of weight to the points already made and add a personal story. A while ago, I was walking down Granny Lane when a loaded type of lorry struck me on the arm, smashing the wing mirror. Fortunately, I was wearing a heavy coat and did not suffer serious injury. But if my grandson had been there, it would have crashed into his head. The lane is narrow and dangerous. You've seen that at some points it is too narrow for vehicles to pass in opposite directions. They have to mount the pavements. And talking of pavements, the surfaces are deteriorating and they're too narrow for parents with prams. They need to be wider, which would mean reducing the road width. This could be done by introducing a stretch of alternative one-way traffic by using methods such as traffic lights or chicanes. We're not professionals at traffic calming methods, but we have proposed a few ideas on your handouts. We would be happy to take advice on what methods would be the most effective at slowing down the traffic. But we do need to slow down the traffic for the sake of our residents, our elderly people, and our children and grandchildren before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you for the.
Thank you
for that.
very much.
Thank you for coming with your deputation to full council today. The road safety team regularly monitor accident data and do note that Granny, Stenard and Hopton Lanes in Murfield have recorded a small number of accidents over the last 5 years. As a collective of all 3 roads, the data shows 6 accidents in total. It is of which 5 resulted in slight injury and 1 serious. It is noted that whilst 1 accident is too many, the team have to prioritise the resources that are made available to address the sites of greatest concern. The current levels of accident on Granny, Steenrod or Hopton Lane, Murfield, as compared to, do not result in these roads being considered or included in any future road safety programmes of works. The enforcement of the district speed restrictions limits remain the responsibility of West Yorkshire Police. A programme of speed indicator devices, SIDS, is being rolled out on request and funded by ward members. This option could be considered by Murfield ward councillors for 1 or more of the locations in consideration. The installations of SIDS act as both as a visual deterrent to potential speeding road users, but more importantly, collect valuable data that can be used to assess the extent of the problem. And really, it's speed limits and speeding is at the heart of everything we want to do. We want our pedestrians, our road users to use our roads safely, and of course always we have to be dependent on the resources available and priorities that are set for the district. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Mathers, and thank you for the petition as well. Deputation, I do apologise. Are there any public petitions? Petitions? No, thank you. Item 7, public question time. Are there any public questions? Okay. Well, there is one. Councillor Bott. Thank you.
Well, it's the same.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Do you want to just say your name?
It's Veronica Woolling
And
and Ian Woolling, and just, is it public question?
It is
time
public
now?
question.
So, a question to Councillor Mather then,
Okay.
if I may.
thank you.
Councillor Mather, you say that the speed limits are appropriate for the area. However, we have got recorded on 3 sections of the road 38.5 miles per hour on each of those roads. So is it okay then that regularly traffic goes at that speed along a riverside which hasn't got any protection?
Councillor Mathers.
It isn't all right. It's always a few people behaving badly. And in this case, the injuries could be fatal. So whilst I don't recommend that anybody goes over 30 in residential areas, there are ways we can help, and I already cited one way of doing this, but we are always willing, Highways is always willing to work with councillors to use some of their significant ward budgets to actually look at other ways of circumventing some of these issues. So SIDS might be one. We may look at other things that you think may be appropriate, but it has to be done in consultation with ward councillors, and we're always sensitive and listening to ensure that our residents are kept safe. So I am sorry, it isn't acceptable, but it does happen, and I acknowledge that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question. I think I have two.
I was just about to get a
Yeah.
supplementary question.
No, can you ask?
Supplementary question, yeah.
But can I do one first? Yeah. Another thing I'd like.
Can I just stop? Can we have a bit of quiet, because it's obviously an important topic.
Okay,
I'd rather listen to her, please. Thank you.
Another thing I'd like to ask Councillor Medder and councillors is that there's an issue of equity here as well, in as much as some areas in our wards have got extensive traffic calming. For example, Mill Street East and Robert Town, which are much bigger roads than ours are, much bigger lanes than the ones that ours are. So how can it be equitable when some areas can have them and some, like ours, are denied them?
Councillor Mathers.
Well, what can I say? The ward councillors have responsibility to ensuring that they look at these issues and, you know, put something in the budget towards alleviating some of those issues. And equity is a question, but it's very, very difficult to actually say where the signage goes. And as far as I'm concerned, Highways does look across, and allocation is done. Any signage, any traffic calming is all done in relation to need, and also, you know, what you're doing, coming to full council, asking us, asking your ward councillors. They have the budget, they can work with us, and maybe we can help. Thank you.
Can,
The cabinet member is saying ward members have devolved powers.
Councillor Bolt. Councillor Bolt. Councillor Bolt. Councillor Bolt. Please.
I was seeking clarity from the legal officer while the members of the public are here that ward members do not have delegated authority.
Okay, thank you for your question. Have you got? Sorry. Can I have a quiet, please? There's too many conversation. Councillor Zaman and his house as well, please. Thank you.
Okay, I think you asked me to clarify. I don't think Councillor Mays, or I certainly didn't hear her say you had delegated authority. I think she referred to speaking to ward councillors about the use of the budget that's available to you. So I don't think she referred to that. That's not what I heard. But okay.
Okay, thank
Yeah, just one question. Yeah, just one. So, Councillor Matthew, you're the cabinet, representative for this matter. You spoke to us about not many reports of accidents down there. The accident I referred to, I did go to the police in Dewsbury, reported it personally. The accident that you may have seen where there's a car overturned in the handouts was reported. When we were looking at the planning permission for the houses on Granny Lane, we looked at accident reports. Neither of those accidents were on there. Are you confident that the information that you get is full and accurate?
Councillor Mathers.
I am confident with the data we collect, and it may seem at the time that these accidents, as I said, one too many, but they do happen, and you can't possibly... So it's a partnership approach. It's not just local authority. We work with the police, we work with the deputy mayor. So it's rather a complicated situation. And all I can say is budgetary constraints and priorities in relation to where the data tells us that the accidents are more than acceptable. So we actually are hamstrung by the budget. So let's see what settlement we get to see if we can put more resources into this area. So I hear what you're saying. Road safety is at the heart of my thinking, and we will try and do our best. But the best we can do at the moment is, as I've suggested, talk to your councillors, and then let's see what can happen. And maybe sometimes in partnership, we can come to some arrangements which alleviate some of the more dangerous situations that you're talking about.
Right, thank you. Just a supplementary. Thank you for that. We're very happy to work in partnership. We haven't got the answers. We want to work with people who know what's effective. When we were going around speaking to local residents, their response was, oh, they just want someone to die before they'll do something. Surely that's not our position as a council, is it?
Thank
Can I just have one supplementary? Thank you, Councillor Mather.
Excuse me, you've already had these two questions, any supplementary as well. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Respond to that. Oh, they've gone. They've gone anyway. Item 8, West Yorkshire Combined Authority Minutes, page 15. To receive for information the minutes of West Yorkshire Combined Authority. The minutes are here for noting. Are there any comments or questions regarding the minutes? Yes. Councillor Anthony Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Am I on there? Yeah. Just to comment on the bus services, and particularly in respect of the collapse of CT Plus and the subsequent loss of essential services which run through the Lindley ward. And we have contacted the Mayor to try and get a response, and we do feel that much more could be done, much more quickly in a situation like this, to restore essential services and help elderly and mobility impaired residents who are particularly affected, and effectively left housebound by such circumstances. I know it's not the fault of West Yorkshire Combined Authority, but surely the Mayor, with her new powers, could step in and take action more swiftly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Pando.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Tony Smith, for that comment to the Mayor. I can't stand here and answer for the Mayor, but one thing I can say is the Mayor is fully committed in making sure that we have a first-class bus service throughout West Yorkshire. But I think the question really, and the comment really, is actually more fundamental in terms of bus deregulation. Many of you will know that buses were taken into private ownership. We don't really have a public bus service because the private business run these services. And one of the things that the Mayor is looking at in great detail is how we can take that private ownership back into public ownership. And that is a big task. It's not that straightforward. But I understand exactly what you feel. We've had a barrage of emails regarding the issue regarding CT service that runs across West Yorkshire. And the Mayor is doing all she can, and we will try and work with her as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pando. Councillor David Hall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In several places in this report of minutes from the Combined Authority, it makes reference to the West Yorkshire Mass Transit Scheme, which is going through the authority at the moment. On page 25, it says about this going to the next decision point and commencing on activity. I'm very concerned, Mr Mayor, that I, as an elected member, haven't been briefed on any of this yet. And I do think it's the kind of thing that probably affects most of our wards in probably a very big way. And I have to say that despite mentioning it in several other places, we're yet to receive any briefing at all on the mass transit scheme. And I would like to ask Councillor Pando whether he would raise this, please, for me as a matter of urgency, because I wouldn't like this to progress any further without elected members, and I'm including us all in this, being actually aware of what is being planned for our wards under this mass transit scheme. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Noted, and I will do my best to try and make sure that the Mayor is aware of this. She's coming in December, so that may be an opportunity where we can actually hopefully share some ideas with her. But thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Councillor Pando. Councillor Marchington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to follow up on Councillor Smith's comments about buses and the failing bus services in Linley, and we found that elsewhere in the borough. A bit concerned about Councillor Pando's response, because what we often get is it's to do with the privatisation of the bus services. And we're talking about 2 or 3 decades where that happens now. It's something that the previous Labour government chose not to reverse. What they did do, they put into place things like quality bus contracts. So there's been powers at a West Yorkshire level for a considerable amount of time, which Labour-led West Yorkshire, has chosen not to implement. So what we want is a few more reassurance. I know the Mayor's got a plan. We know there's going to be the change of prices, but those prices, the £2 a bus service, is only any good if you've got that service to do. So are you aware of what the detailed plans are to ensure there's an appropriate bus service, particularly to vulnerable residents across the whole of West Yorkshire? What's the plan, Councillor Pando?
Councillor Pando.
It's in the background saying, is this in the minutes? I don't think it's in the minutes, but I think I need to respond. That is a factor. We don't have that control over the buses that we'd like to have. And I'm not going to make any apology for my government or any other government. But one of the things that Tracy, our Mayor, is looking at is how we can actually get more control. And you're right, we did have quality contracts when Labour government was in power. But the last 2 years, when we had the pandemic, bus patronage has actually gone down quite significantly, and that has had an impact on the bus service. And the recent fiasco we see regarding bus services, cuts to services, has concerned all of us. But I know that Mayor is fully committed in making sure that we do actually get a first-class bus service and a first-class transport system within West Yorkshire. But the bottom line is that that takes time. The amount of detailed work that is being done, not just in West Yorkshire, but in other male combined authorities. Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham is actually also trying to pursue how we can take that bus ownership back, because the system is broken, and I hope that we can work together to try and fix it.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. Councillor Andrew Pinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of points. If I can go back on the point that Councillor Panda has just been talking about. The Mayor has made announcements about low bus fares. Unfortunately, a number of reports have been received by the authority suggesting that the information that users can get at bus stops is not accurate, and buses are missing from the display and things like that. It's the kind of thing that the scrutiny committee, of which I'm a member, will no doubt be looking into, because there's nothing that will put people off more than not having the right information to plan their journey. And if a bus does actually exist but it's not on the display, then that's, as I say, not particularly helpful. The other point I wanted to make is it goes back to what Councillor David Hall was just saying about mass transit. And there has been some talk about the Spen Valley Greenway, which I am sure locally people would not be very pleased if their beloved Greenway was taken for a mass transit route. Yes, thank you. I think because, particularly during the pandemic, it has become a lifeline to many people because it's a safe walking route for really a large number of people in the Spen Valley. But it does emphasise a point that if West Yorkshire wants to have modern methods of moving people about, then it is going to have to spend very, very large sums of money, particularly if it can't use old railway lines, which are quite a useful thing to have. Something that Greater Manchester, for example, has got a lot of, and they've been able to produce a system that is really very good. I would like some assurance from somebody or other that the money can be found to do this in West Yorkshire. In other words, spend lots and lots of money, because it will be necessary, I'm afraid. And I'm not sure what sort of answer I'll get from Councillor Pandor on that score, but I know what I think. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pinnock. Councillor Pandor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Pinnock. You've covered quite a lot of points in your speech. There were some comments, some questions, but I can only repeat what I said. In terms of bus fares, I think it's good news that it's £2 per journey and maximum of £4.50. And I'm really pleased that that's going to be rolled out nationally, and that's something that's really positive that this government is actually also doing. In terms of the details regarding where a mass transit route can or cannot go, there will be full consultation. And we only have a set amount of money. West Yorkshire is, I think, the only part of the country where there is no mass transit bus system, part of the core city. Manchester's got one, Sheffield's got one, Nottingham's got one, etc., etc. And that's why mass transit is something that is needed. And again, David Hall mentioned a really valid point, and it's something that we will have to grapple with. And we will be lobbying government to make sure that that resource does come down. But there are other priorities. But believe me, Councillor Pinnock, I am pushing as much as I can, because we do need one. You know, that connectivity, the smaller key cities, are integral to make sure that Leeds functions as a core city, and we also actually have our fair share of the resources that are allocated. Compared to down south, per capita basis, we are poorly funded. That is a big argument we need to have. If we got half the money that London gets, we would not be having these arguments. But I will continue to pursue the Mayor to make sure that something happens. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Pando. Councillor Martin Bolt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just picking up on the issue of buses, it's great that the bus fares are being lowered, but what I hope that Councillor Pando will do, as the leader of this council, the ambassador of the council and a representative, is to lobby for better routes, regularity and reliability. I know when Andrew was on the Passenger Transport Authority, he would often tell us about the paucity of services from Huddersfield through Cleckheaton to Leeds, and I don't suppose they've improved with age. 20 years ago, the subject of a direct, regular route down the A62 was raised. The bus operators are still not taking that to its fruition. It goes part way down and then goes through Heckmondwike, Burstall and Batley, with the result that I once, when the Mayor was elected, and I think she'd lived in Hartshead for much of the time, I asked her if she'd join me on a journey into Wellington House in Leeds from the New Inn at Robertstown. She could get on one of her buses and I'd cycle and we'd see who got there first. And I know I was never taken up on that challenge, but I know who it would be because I looked at the bus services. If we want to achieve modal shift, and looking down the A62, we've got the whole Leeds Road corridor going out of Huddersfield. We then come around, we've got the Murfield 25 development, we've got IKEA and all those others, which are great employment and providers, but they're not served by regular services. So people are not going to leave the car at home to be standing there for a long time. And as I say, the other corridor going up through Cleckheaton, through Gomersall, Berkshire and places like that is equally a paucity. So will you take up that challenge and join me in lobbying for regular, reliable services, because the quality bus contracts would allow us to get the operators to be doing that. And I'm pleased that colleagues have raised the issue about mass transit. As someone, Councillor Pando from Huddersfield for 30 years who've lived here, brought your family up, you may not be as well acquainted with the Sven Valley as those from North Kirklees. So the Sven Valley Greenway is a wonderful resource. It's nationally recognised, internationally won awards. It was mentioned about an asset for the Sven Valley. It's a strategic route. It does in fact link your beloved Huddersfield through my beloved Murfield, the Sven Valley and out to Bradford without touching much of a main road. There are, I think from memory when we developed routes on it, there are 6 routes, 6 schools for which it's a safe route to school. And it should have been, if you'd have got your planning right, readily accessible to the Sven Valley Leisure Centre. But unfortunately, the active travel links were never put in when you did the planning for the Sven Valley Leisure Centre. So if you allow your colleagues on West Yorkshire to lose that facility, all those people who use non-motorised transport...
Councillor Bolt, can you refer to the minutes of that meeting?
I am doing, Mr Mayor.
Are you? Because you seem to be going...
Page 21, yeah. Mr Mayor, and I'm referring to colleagues' comments and things which I've already made. So mass rapid transit, Mr Mayor. I mean, mass rapid transit in the Sven Valley Greenway, Mr Mayor, will even reach as far as Savile and Thornhill, because, as you probably know from the bike that I loaned you, I don't think you've used it very much, but yeah,
I have.
From the end of the Sven Valley Greenway, it drops on the canal towpath. So it is a strategic route. So will you join us in protecting the Sven Valley Greenway, increasing bus services onto regular and reliability, and making sure that the north of Kirklees is as well treated as your beloved Huddersfield?
Thank you. Just to clarify, I have used that bike a couple of times on the Greenway to Bradford Moor and back as well. Thank you for that. Councillor Pando.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Bolt. He always amuses me when Councillor Bolt talks, because he goes round the houses and there's a question there, and the answer to that is yes. But, Mr Mayor, one thing that I am, I'm sort of like really astonished about is Councillor Bolt and his cycling. You know, I can't even beat him in my car going from A to B because he's a fantastic cyclist and I don't think anybody can beat him. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. Councillor Alex Lukic.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to quickly discuss the bus fares that are mentioned in the minutes and some of the promises surrounding that mayoral policy that actually haven't been kept. So, for example, on the Metro website, when this initiative was announced, it said, will fares increase? No, any fare currently under £2 will stay under £2. Now, that hasn't happened. Arriva, I do blame Arriva mainly for this. They've used the new fares as a cover to raise some of their single fares, which some might have anticipated. But the fact it said definitively on the Metro website that fares won't increase suggests that there was an agreement within the enhanced bus partnership. And I think that needs to be followed up quite severely at the combined authority level. There is one other thing that is a combined authority led product, which it says, will I still be able to get discounts if I buy multiple day savers in packs of 3, 5 or 10? And it says, yes, though discounts will be announced nearer the time, but actually there are no discounts anymore for buying multiple day savers. So I would appreciate if that could also be raised at the combined authority, because these were commitments made as part of the initiative that haven't been delivered.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Panda.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think you asked some questions and you answered them yourselves. I'll do what I can in terms of the issues you've raised. But you can actually contact the Mayor directly. You know, she's not some aloof person that hides behind some, barrier. But I'll take your issues up with the Mayor, and I'm sure that she's trying her best. Because one thing I can say, Mr Mayor, is Tracy, right? Yeah, she's got so much energy. She's everywhere. And I'm sure that, she's trying her best to make sure that we get the best deal for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. Councillor Liz Smage.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I refer to page 17, minute 94, just in case anybody wants to know.
Thank you, Councillor Smage.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask Councillor Panda what discussions he's been having in relation to bus service improvements in Kirklees. As ward councillors, we've been having some discussions for a little while with the combined authority about bus services in our ward, or the lack of them in places. And I just wonder, as leader of the council, what discussions Councillor Panda has been having, especially about bus services in North Kirklees, which have very long routes and in some places do not provide a service to essential services. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Panda.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. At last, we've got a question on a minute that I can respond to, but I don't think I can give you an answer that you might be satisfied with. Because, Mr Mayor, the bottom line is that the bus service is actually crumbling, especially the last year or so, despite the fact that we've ploughed in billions, and the service that we've got back hasn't really been half as good as what we expected. But we will keep on arguing the case, we will keep on fighting the case, and I'm sure Mayor Tracy Brabin will do everything she can. I will keep on banging the drum to make sure that we do actually get the services that we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. Councillor Ramsey.
Because there is something in there about zero emissions, and there is something in there about an investment that's been made to enable buses to be cleaner in our area. So that's the point that I was going to make. I do agree that lowering the fees has been good, and it is good. I did actually meet somebody from Arriva today, and they were actually saying that bus footfall is now up to about 85% of what it was pre-pandemic, which is good. It's better than it has been previously. And we need to ensure that there is funding coming into the bus companies if they're going to keep some of those areas, some of those routes running that we wanted to have. I am not for privatisation at all of buses. We know that that's how it is, but we are where we are, and we need to ensure that we get that robust and reliable service through the routes that we've got. I think zero emissions is a good place to go.
Thank you, Councillor Ramsey. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a number of points to raise which are on different points. So, excuse me while I work out which one's which. If perhaps first, Councillor Pandor, on minute number 98, capacity, transport and economy, on page 19, well actually on page 20, it talks about the appointment of 2 new director posts. I'm interested particularly in the Director of Transport Policy, because I've been asking this council for a while now about our transport policy, our transport strategy, which I understand is in the early stages of development. And it would be interesting to know what linkage we plan to have with this Director of Transport Policy and what influence we will have over this individual in terms of securing support for particularly the south of the borough, that whenever I look at any plans brought forward by this council, it seems to end at Waterloo and doesn't go any further. If you want, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just raise all of the points and then... my second item relates to the next agenda item, 99, which talks about skills boot camps on page 22, which again I'm quite interested in. I'd be interested in knowing where that training's been delivered, because obviously there's been a significant investment in skills training in Kirklees, not least in Dewsbury at Pioneer House. So will some of that funding be coming to Kirklees? Or if not, where is that funding going? Where are those boot camps, dare I say, being delivered? Just commenting on buses, along with my colleagues from Lindley, my ward has been impacted by the loss of bus services in some of my villages, but I picked that up directly with West Yorkshire with support from the Cabinet member Eric Firth as well, so hopefully we'll get some decisions on that in the next couple of days. And my final point, Mr. Mayor, is a more general one. We've had a discussion about mass transit, and I think everybody is probably in the same space on wanting this to be successful. And my question is, we have across this chamber from different parties members that sit on different committees in the combined authority. What briefing is being done to all of those members to make sure that we have a Kirklees view, we have a Kirklees understanding of what the ask is? Because if we're not doing that, we're failing before we started, because you can guarantee that Leeds and Bradford will have this all sorted out. So if we are not doing something to make sure that all members on the combined authority are getting the same briefing about what the asks are from Kirklees, please can somebody take responsibility for putting that in place? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Panda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first question Councillor Taylor asked, page 20, regarding the new posts. That's precisely the reason why we've actually created these new posts, to actually make sure that we identify the issue that we're talking about and they're taken into account. Then that's taken into consideration in the planning phase, and then any analysis that needs to be done is actually factored in. Looking at how then we can actually sort of like meet that gap. And to be honest with you, Mr. Mayor, the demands that are placed on the bus service and the combined authority, the bottom line is, right, is we don't have the same kind of parity in terms of resources. That is a fact. And unless that disparity is addressed by government, by central government, then we're always going to be having that debate. But these posts will actually add value to actually what we're doing. The other point regarding the boot camp, skills boot camp, there's been 1,000 individuals that are going to be deployed. I don't know the detail, but I'll get that detail for you, Councillor Taylor, and ask somebody from the combined authority to send that over. And in terms of the general point we talked about, mass transit, West Yorkshire Combined Authority has a governance structure, and on that governance structure there are cross-party members that sit on there. And my view is very, very clear. But this was part of what the government offer was when the devolution debate was taking place. Because ideally what we would need is an assembly like we have in London, a London assembly where you've actually got locally elected members that actually make the London authority. We don't have that. And that is a gap that needs to be addressed within the Constitution, because it's not just about this Mayoral Combined Authority, it's also an issue for other Mayoral Combined Authorities. But I will try and do whatever I can. I'm not the government, I can't change legislation, I can't change the Constitution of the Mayoral Combined Authority. But having said that, you know, the Mayoral Combined Authority does actually, on a regular basis, have conversations. There's the Mayor's big conversation on buses, so members are always free to participate, and also residents are always free to participate. The Mayor will be here in December. I'm sure that, you know, she will get questions asked in terms of how the whole setup can be improved. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pando. Councillor Lawson. No.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of points. One is section VII, bottom of page 24. We talk about the combined authority entering into funding agreements. And this one talks specifically about highways asset management, network management, and safer roads programmes, up to the amount shown below. And Kirklees has a £6,161,288 allocated to it. Now, I think we probably need to see some detail of that when those programmes, and I assume these programmes are already extant, but when those programmes are in play, we could do to see those and what they are. And I wonder whether, if there's any underspend in all of that, we might consider the good people from Murfield who came earlier and see if any schemes might be put their way and talk to the ward members and see what can be done if there's any underspend there. The other comment I'd make, which is more of a question really, is it's about page 22 and the contribution to capital programme update. It talks about Brownfield, the Brownfield Housing Fund. Now, I know that there are sites in Kirklees that are recipient of these funds. Now, the specific question I have is, if a site has been aided by these funds, should we, as an authority, as a planning authority, accept any form of sustainability arguments where the developers can then turn out their pockets and say, sorry, we can't afford this, when they've had those funds already? Is that a valid excuse for a developer to be able to do that once they've had those funds? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Pando.
The last question you asked on page 22 first regarding Brownfield Housing Fund. The short answer is yes. I don't know the detail regarding, you know, how that's allocated and whatever, but when they're doing sustainability and viability assessments, I'm assured that everything that needs to be taken into consideration is taken into consideration. I can find out further detail for you, Councillor Lawson, on that. And the item under page 24 at the bottom regarding the allocation of the 6.161 million that's been allocated to Kirklees, I think it's good news that we've actually managed to get that fund. But again, I can get somebody from the Combined Authority to get you some details on that, not a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Pando. My last speaker is Councillor Sokol on this particular item. We've had a lot of debate and yeah, we've had a lot of good discussion. So my final speaker is Councillor Sokol on this particular item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be very long. I just want to say about the flat rate bus fare which has been introduced a week ago by the West Yorkshire Mayor Tracy Braven. On Sunday evening, a bus driver who worked in Dewsbury area on Arriva buses, he came to my house to get some document to sign. I asked him about the new bus fare which has been introduced by the West Yorkshire Mayor. He said, Councillor Sokol, few weeks ago, he used to driving buses. He was feeling guilty because the buses were empty, no passengers. Yeah? And now, he said, he finished his duty, 8 o'clock, he came straight to my house. He said, all the time, the buses were more than half full, off-peak time. Yesterday, Tuesday, my daughter traveled from Huddersfield bus station to home on Edgerton. She was so glad. He said, Dad, the bus fare, new bus fare, £2 a journey and £4.50 a day rider is really good. Really good. People would welcome the West Yorkshire Mayor's this cheapest fare. He said the bus, she got it 10:30 in the morning from home, which is an off-peak period. She was it was more than half full. Used to be only 10 or 15 people. So we all here be sitting around cross-party. We should welcome the new bus fare flat rate introduced by the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, especially Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sokol.
I've got another question I'd like to ask, and I understand that Councillor Taylor had indicated as well. So is there any reason why we can't ask questions, please?
Yeah, it's at my discretion to allow further question or not. Councillor Matchington? Which I already have done. Thank you. Item 9. Financial Outcome Report, page 47, reference from Cabinet, Councillor Paul Davis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This annual report was presented to Cabinet on the 9th of August and is now with full Council for consideration. It outlines the annual financial performance of the Council for the financial year 2021-22 and also outlines Cabinet's related recommendations. The report includes information on the Council's overall general fund revenue outturn position, which, we'll be pleased to know, achieved a break-even position against a net revenue budget of £327 million. The outturn position includes COVID spend in year of £37 million and offsetting government COVID funding, including the planned drawdown of £21 million COVID funding rolled forward through reserves from 2020-21 into 21-22. Elsewhere, there were in-year pressures on service income losses in excess of £4 million. And alongside this, a combination of compensating government COVID grant offset and a release of some contingency provision in central budgets. The report also notes an overall planned net drawdown of £30 million from general funds reserves in year, largely again related to COVID funding rolled forward from 2020 to 21, as noted earlier. The total general fund reserves at year end were £167 million. The collection fund in-year position overall was £5.4 million deficit and an overall accumulated deficit at year-end of £14 million. However, this was largely a timing issue due to compensating government grants related to additional business rate reliefs and some COVID-related compensation grants, which will be applied 2022-23 against the deficit roll forward. This report also refers to the very successful participation we had in the government safety valve dedicated schools grant deficit reduction programme. Obviously a very snappy title, but a very important area for us. This council previously reported extensively on an accumulated deficit position against this high-need funding block. This was forecast to be 35 million in 21-22, and we've now received an upfront government funding contribution of 13.5 million on 31st of March, which has now brought that deficit down to 22 million. And there will be a further 20 million funding released by government over the next 5 years. However, this is conditional on us achieving and delivering planned in-year savings targets over that period. So there is a contribution from us, absolutely, as a council. Housing revenue account reported a deficit of 3.5 million. This was largely planned and was mainly around the programming of essential revenue compliance work on our housing stock. In terms of capital, overall spend was 128 million, an increase of about 35 million compared to 2020-21, and it does indicate a scaling up of capital investment. The revised capital budget was 157 million, with an underspend of 29. Also, there's an underlying slippage at year-end. Before the year-end, one-off capitalisation exercise was 33.7 million, and the report actually recommends rolling this capital rollover from 21-22 to 22-23. There's reference in the report to the Treasury, the annual performance review on the Treasury management for 21-22, and this was also reported to Corporate Governance and Audit Committee on the 17th of June of this year. Finally, the financial implications section of this report also makes reference to emerging cost living pressures impacting on budget plan assumption for 22-23, and clearly we refer to that in the MTFS and later on in the key discussion.
Councillor Davis, you've got 10 seconds.
So I would like to, perfect timing, I would like to move that the recommendations of paragraph 6 are set out on page 48, and that the council will approve these recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Is that seconded?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to second that, but because we have to get this item out of the way in the next 5-10 minutes, can I propose that we go for the vote? Because this is very, very important business, right, yeah? And if council wanted this debate to be had on this item, they want to waste the time on the previous items, right, yeah, where it's really just a referral from the Combined Authority, Mr. Mayor. So I would like to propose that we go straight for the vote. Thank you. Otherwise, we're not going to get through the business.
Anybody seconding that? Councillor Scott. All those in favour? That is carried. Thank you. Councillor Bolt, can you sit down, please? Councillor Bolt, please. Thank you. Thank you. That's gone. Can we vote? What is it?
Did you do before? Did you do for?
Yeah.
Did you do again?
So those for against? How many got?
They want more time, then spend more time.
Yeah, exactly. Can we have 5 names for a recorded vote, please? Yeah. We've got 5 anyway. We did a roll call. Okay. We're doing a roll call. Thank you.
Nobody can hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
I'm doing it with this microphone because I think it's clearer than that one. So I'm going to call out your name and you'll tell me whether you are for or against the report. Thank you. Okay? Oh, sorry. I thought so we're having a recorded vote on. Okay. We're calling for...
This is moving to the vote. This vote.
Sorry. Can somebody... Okay. This is a... Okay. This is
Can you quiet, please? Thank you.
This is a recorded... This is a vote on whether we... a recorded vote on whether we move to the vote on this item. Okay? Okay? You, as I understand it, you want to move to the vote.
Mr. Mayor, point of order. Point of order. We had a conversation on this. Precisely how we vote is changed. Everybody agreed, all parties, that we will just have a show of hands. No, I said I'm easy, right? Yeah. But if council wants to waste their time, that's fine. I don't have a problem in recording the vote. So let's just move.
Can we...
Need to listen to...
Thank you. Can we go to recording vote, please? Thank you.
Okay, so... Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read out everybody's name. Okay? Okay, so, Councillor Pandor.
For the report.
We're doing a recorded vote on whether we move straight to the vote on this item. Okay?
Just get Julie to call up the...
Well, you have to.
Call up the name. Call up the name.
I'm calling out the name. We have a number of people have asked for a recorded vote, and so the standard. So I'm now reading out your names to go to a recorded vote.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to try and run through this as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So starting with you, Councillor Pandor. Yes, okay. Councillor Hall.
Against.
Councillor John Lawson.
Also against.
Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Greaves.
Against.
Councillor Ahmed. Councillor Allison. Councillor Anwar. Councillor Armour. Councillor Bamford. Councillor Bolt. Councillor Burke. Councillor Butt. Councillor Crook. Councillor Dadd. Councillor Paula Davies. Councillor Paul Davies.
For.
Councillor Donald Firth. Councillor Eric Firth. Councillor Gregg. Councillor Hall. Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Holmes. Councillor Homewood. Councillor Yusra Hussain. We haven't got Councillor Kaushik. Councillor Kendrick. Councillor Khan. Councillor Joe Lawson. Councillor Sue Lee Richards. Councillor Lise Hamilton. Councillor Lunat. Councillor Lowe. Councillor Lukic. Councillor Marchington. Councillor Mather. Councillor McCarthy. Councillor McGrath. Councillor McGuinn. Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Monroe. Councillor O'Donovan. Councillor Patterson. Councillor Pervez. Councillor Amanda Pinnock. Councillor Andrew Pinnock. Councillor Kath Pinnock. Councillor Ramsey. Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Sarwar. Councillor Scott. Councillor Sheard. Councillor Simpson. Councillor Smage. Councillor Anthony Smith. Councillor Richard Smith. Councillor Sokol. Councillor Stephen. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Turner. Councillor Uller. Councillor White. Councillor Adam Zaman. Councillor Habiban Saman. Okay.
Trying to show of hands for the actual vote, if it's carried.
So is that carried? So we'll move to the vote.
Councillors, just read the votes. 34 for, 28 against, 1 abstain, and that's carried. Can we now go to a vote for show of hands? Those for? Item 9. And those against? Yeah. Those any abstentions? Okay. Thank you for that.
You'll have to tell them that's what they're voting on.
I made it clear. Excuse me, I'll explain again. We are voting for show of hands for item 9, Financial Autumn Report 21-22. So again, in terms of voting on that, show of hands. For, please. Can we count them? Thank you.
Abstentions.
And any abstentions? That's carried. Okay. Thank you for that. We are now having a break for 10 minutes. You've took 5 minutes of my time already. Thank you. Paul Davis to give a brief presentation and introduce the yes. Sorry, I do apologise. Can I invite Councillor Pandor to give a brief presentation and introduce the key discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief because what I'll be doing is I'll just be introducing this item, and Councillor Paul Davis will then give you a presentation in terms of what we are doing and the challenges we are facing. And I'm hoping that we will get some really good contributions in terms of how we address the cost of living crisis. Mr. Mayor, I've always said that inclusion is a main priority of this council, and the danger now is that we are going to get more people that are going to be excluded economically as the worst crisis economically hits this council and many others across Britain and indeed internationally. We always talk about the most marginalised people in our society who are living in poverty are going to be adversely affected. But now the situation is such that people who are genuinely looking after themselves and are able to meet their own expenses and those who are on the margins of society are going to be even further marginalised. And I think children and elderly will be probably adversely affected at the same time. Businesses and the economy is going to be adversely affected, and it's very, very clear that market failure is happening because nobody can actually plan for what we are experiencing at the moment. And that's why I'm optimistic that government intervention will take place, and I'm hoping that the new Prime Minister will take this issue head on. For the last few months, we've had a government that's really not been effective at all, and I'm hoping that the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, will actually come forward with a package of measures. Household needs support, businesses need support as well, but at the same time, we all know what 12 years of austerity did to this council and our communities, and that's why it's really important that any intervention that takes place must also have public services at the heart of it, because what we are the front line, we are the first line of defence for many of our communities. I'm hoping that we can have a sensible debate, and the issues that are facing us are unprecedented. Without further ado, Mr. Mayor, what I will do is I'll ask my colleague, Councillor Paul Davis, now to do a presentation. He will brief you on what we are doing and what measures we are taking and the challenges ahead that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pandor. Councillor Paul Davis.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to try and work the technology. No, not doing it. I'll talk to it. Whoop, hang on.
Be patient.
Oh, let's go back. There we go. The technology works. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and the opportunity for this key discussion, absolutely vital discussion, in fact, at this current time. Tonight, I want to focus on the local action we're taking on the cost of living crisis, but very much want to open up the debate to hear what members are doing within their communities as well. And I want us to explore how we can build on that work. Certainly we want to hear fresh ideas about how we can help our residents through these dark times. And as we know, the situation at the moment is stark. And just two statistics we'll put up on the slide there, which help us understand the issues that we face in Kirklees. Even before this crisis, we had 36% of children in Kirklees living in poverty. That is unbelievable and tragic. And each one of those children is an individual tragedy. It's not just a number. And when we think about the households that they live in, and even some of those households where perhaps there are some children not defined as living in poverty, we see that 37% of households in Kirklees have an annual income below 20,000. Even in good times, and it's difficult to remember good times, to live on that income and to provide a decent support for your family is, to say the least, difficult. And it's also estimated that over 80% of Kirklees households could experience food or poverty this winter. Now, we know, we've heard certain leaks of what the government may be doing or may not be doing. However, at this point, we have to say that based on what we've got forecast, we know that there's going to be a huge impact on our citizens. 80% is 30,000 people. And remember, even if there is a freeze, and hopefully there will be a freeze, the current situation is unaffordable for many, many people and is having a huge impact on their situations. And it's not just fuel poverty. We're talking about entire household budgets being stretched beyond breaking point. And recently, the former Chancellor of the Exchequer actually warned that people on £45,000 a year could expect to face severe difficulties in the cost of living crisis. This is not just people at the bottom end of the income strata. This is people right across, middle earners and upwards. And to put that context in that 45,000 figure, the average wage in Kirklees is less than 25,000. So the council, as we know, has already declared an emergency. So what are we doing locally? We're getting financial support out to our people who need it most. We're delivering the £150 energy rebate. We're targeting and distributing 2 tranches of the government's household support fund. In the latest round of payments, totalling £3.7 million, we've prioritised 3 areas: children, pensioners, and additional funding for our brilliant voluntary and community organisations. And you'll remember that this administration put an extra £2.9 million into this year's budget to support people with the council tax bills. And we know that government intervention offered so far has been insufficient. Any help is welcome, but it is not filling the gap. And we also know that no council, and that is no council, has the capacity to solve these problems at the moment. But we can, and we must, respond to this emergency. That's why, as a council, we continue to fund 3 food banks. We're supporting the excellent Bread and Butter Thing project with 2 new hubs opening shortly. And we'll continue to connect residents with the support they urgently need. Our comms campaign has distributed more than 40,000 booklets with advice on financial support and ways of getting help with your bills and finances. And we've had a huge response from residents to our promotion of local community groups, and we've put in all support and information in one place online, which local people are accessing in their thousands every single week. And as we've said before, our customer service centre is advising more and more people on more and more complex cases. But they're making sure that everybody gets the attention they need and the help they're entitled to. Out there in the community, we know our libraries are already havens for people who need help, support and safety. And as we head up into winter, they will also be a place where people will be kept warm. And we will continue to talk to partners in the voluntary and community sector about how we can support people who can't afford to heat their homes. We're currently talking to third sector leaders about this very thing. And also just this week, we had a meeting with other partners within a Tackling Poverty meeting to talk absolutely about warm welcome and warm places. And that is something that we are pursuing at this time and looking at ideas. And it will be something I'm sure members will raise this evening. Our response has mobilised the council, its staff and resources to support people through this crisis. But by no means are we alone in this effort. We saw through COVID that this is the kind of place where people look after each other and step up in times of crisis. So much of that is down to the commitment of our community and our voluntary sector. They are essential in building resilience and getting through this crisis. A voluntary community and social enterprise investment strategy is key to our work, helping organisations access funding, building links across the sector for mutual support, and working with individuals and organisations to build a sustainable sector. But we as councillors, all of us, are at the heart of this as well. It doesn't matter what party you represent. I know in Home Valley South we're already putting plans in place to bring together public, private and voluntary sector groups to work on ways that we can support people within our own ward. And I know there's great work going on elsewhere. And tonight, let's share what's happening across Kirklees and within your wards so that we can show residents that we're united and that we're on their side. But the worst thing we can do now is to forget about the long term. Absolutely, there is the short-term support that we need to be doing. But we also need to be looking at economic growth, at skills and opportunities as the way of avoiding future cost of living crises. And that's exactly why we're investing in our town centres and our infrastructure. It's why we're bidding for every levelling up fund available to us. And it's why we're supporting businesses through our Gateway for Startups, our Advice for SMEs and our business centres. And it means as a council we're taking up our ambitions and our residents' needs through lobbying for fair funding and making a reality of levelling up. Because, as we know, a strong and inclusive economy is the best prevention against future crises. I want to end by saying thank you to all the council staff who once again have stepped up to support residents in such difficult circumstances. They've been amazing and continue to be amazing. The work that they carry out, much of it is emotionally draining. They are dealing with these immense tragedies and stress that people are experiencing every day. And of course, we're putting in measures to help them and support them as well. But they have my huge respect for what they are doing. And I'm sure we all would like to thank them for that. Also like to thank our voluntary and community sector who are on the front line every single day. They really are the pride of Kirklees, and we will work with them throughout this crisis and into the future. So this debate is an opportunity for us to stand alongside all of them, and I look forward to hearing colleagues' views and ideas. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor John Taylor.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, may I start by saying that I welcome this key discussion item. I think it's right that the Council does tackle key issues and concerns that we're all picking up from our communities. The timing, however, is, and it's nobody's fault, but it is a little unfortunate when we learn today that the newly appointed Prime Minister intends to set out a comprehensive package of proposals to this issue tomorrow. So we're left in the awkward position of debating it today without knowing perhaps what may be planned in terms of interventions tomorrow. However, I do think there's a huge opportunity for us this evening to focus the discussion not on what the government should or shouldn't be doing or what it is or isn't planning on doing, but looking at our communities, as Councillor Davies has said, and exploring what we as a council are able to do, perhaps in conjunction with our partners and others, to tackle the issue that we're all facing into. And I'd also like to just take a moment to echo his thanks to council staff and others that are engaging and supporting through this issue at the moment. The energy issue is, for most residents and for small and large businesses alike, a really urgent one about affordability. But alongside this, there's also a concern about the security of supply of energy in global markets. Markets affected by the actions of Putin in the Ukraine and the dependency of much of the EU on Russian gas supplies, a dependency which actually was called out by Trump but smirked at by EU politicians. I'm no fan of Trump, but I think at least once perhaps he did call it correctly. I do think the wording of the discussion could have been a little better if it focused more on the attention on the actions we as council can take, rather than talking about the impacts it may have on our communities. So if we could try and, as Councillor Davis has said, focus our discussion on how we can help address those impacts, rather than just talking about the impacts, I think that would be a strong use of our time. Energy costs, it's a difficult one for any authority, government or council, to easily direct the support and funds to those who are most at need, as invariably both governments and councils tend to provide support at an individual level, whereas energy costs are at a household level. Hence, the reason for the use of the council tax base to provide the £150 earlier in the year, and also the decision of the government to ask the energy companies to apply a discount on bills funded by the government for the next payment of £400 for all households. It's probably worth recalling that so far this year, already, a total of £37 billion is being made available to support bills, most of this being delivered over the next few months, with additional support being focused on those who are on means-tested benefits, pensioners, and those who are disabled. There also has, of course, been additional discretionary funding provided to the council, as Paul has mentioned, to distribute those who are most of need. And I hope that we'll see more of this type of support, because there will always be people that fall through the gaps, that don't meet this criteria or that criteria. So there does need to be an element of discretion applied. The council, though, may be called upon to help again, and I wouldn't be surprised to see us being asked to help ensure support for energy bills for businesses, both large and small, can be swiftly distributed. Our teams were superb at dealing with the support for business throughout the pandemic, and I wouldn't be surprised to see us being asked to do that again. We have the contacts, we have the information. I suspect it's the quickest and easiest way to get money to those in need. Our own finances, as laid out in item 10 on the agenda, show that the council won't be immune from these impacts either. But we need to balance the need to balance our books with the need to provide support to residents in need. There's been much talk nationally about public bodies opening their spaces to those finding it difficult to heat their homes, and it was good to hear Councillor Davis mention that. And it also then provides an opportunity for us to have the right conversations with people then, to ensure that they're getting all of the financial support that they're entitled to. And I hope and I expect to see our library and museum staff leading in that, and also see frontline teams like Community Plus playing a role in how we reach out to those individuals and make sure that they're getting the support they're entitled to. There's also a role for us as a council to see what we can do to reduce energy usage, to keep costs down. The council could perhaps signal to residents that in times of need, in times of scarcity supply.
Your time is up. Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. When we talk about security of supply, and I've heard what's been said by Councillor Taylor, I think we're often looking at through the wrong end of the telescope when we look at security of supply. We look at how we provide energy, not how we save energy. And so we hear all this talk about reintroducing fracking, getting more oil and gas when we've got a climate crisis, putting Jacob Rees-Mogg in charge of climate change. And so if you have an approach which is about providing rather than trying to reduce the amount of energy that we need in homes and buildings in the first place, you're going at it in the wrong way. So we need to be looking at insulation, we need to be looking at energy efficiency, we need to be looking at solar on buildings to provide more of our energy from our own sources, having more energy storage that's involved in that to make that energy spread over a longer period. All the things that were the things that we should have been doing to address the climate crisis are the things that if we'd have done years and years and years ago, we would be in a much better position than we are now. Fuel bills are unaffordable for millions of people right now. So freezing them at an unaffordable level is not the right way of going about things. And that's what the Labour Party is saying, and that is what the government may well do in some shape or form tomorrow by paying billions of pounds to energy companies who've already made billions of pounds worth of profit. The question is, what can we do as a council? And there are a lot of things that we can do as a council. The warm places idea is great, and councils right the way across the country are thinking, oh, we've got to get lots of people in community halls and keep them warm. And how appealing is that to people, really? I'm going to be warm in a horrible hall somewhere. It's actually got to be quite, you've actually got to look at what is the specification, for what is the reason why somebody might want to go and be warm at somebody else's expense in a hall? You know, what is the offer? What are the hours that it's open for? What's the offer when you go there? Are the seats going to be comfortable? Is there going to be entertainment? Will you be able to watch the telly? How do you cope with the fact that people have different needs and want different things in the community? How do you make sure there's lots of places to go to which all have a good offer and a good reason to go to? And so that's got to be really thought out with a lot of detail. And what is the council going to offer those places? Are we going to subsidise community buildings in terms of their energy supply? Is that going to happen? Is that something that we can do? Can we provide money to these places? And I think there's also the whole thing about looking at people themselves and what advice we can offer to communities, because some people might just be 4 or 5 people who want to come together and share their space in a little warm club, perhaps, like one day a week at my place, one day a week at yours, and give some advice about how you actually make that an enjoyable experience of getting together with other people who might not be used to being as sociable in that way as they want to be. How might we talk to people about warm clubs? And a lot of people simply will not heat their homes. They will not do that. So if we can't heat the homes, what can we do to help the person? Things like energy professionals who've been in this game for years and years are saying, we ought to be looking at electric gilets, warm gilets that people can put on in the home to keep them warm. You can't heat the house. How do you keep the person warm? So what is it we're doing as a council to help with those sort of things? And advice and advocacy, I think we've actually got quite a confused advice and advocacy service across Kirklees. We get the private sector to do some things we do ourselves. What is the way how we actually get people to different services? When do we send somebody to citizens advice, and when do we send somebody to benefits advice in the council? How does that all work? How does that come together? I'm confused about that. I'd like to have a good understanding of how we do that. And how do
Councillor Cooper, you've got 30 seconds.
That's fine. And how do we actually structure the approach that we're taking? What's the structure by which councillors come together? What's the structure by which we get together with organisations to have a hold of this? At the moment, it's let's hear what the Cabinet member has to say. But actually, I think a lot of us want a lot more involvement in the design of our approach to the cost of living crisis. Thank you.
Can I just remind members this item has been allocated only 60 minutes, so I will close this item at 8:05. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and just wanted to pick up on something that Councillor Cooper had said regarding energy supply, which obviously is one of the reasons why we're in the mess we're in nationally. And I think it's worth saying that the Labour Party made a lot of partisan points at the last full council meeting. I wanted to make a speech tonight that was in no way partisan, but it is worth pointing out that when Labour left government in 2010, they did actually leave a situation where they had 7% of our energy supply is renewable energy. So they didn't invest in renewables. It's now 40%. So we're making progress. We're getting there. But moving on, I just wanted to say that, like all members here, we do share...
Can members be quiet and please let the councillor talk? Thank you.
We do share, obviously, the increasing knowledge that this cost of living crisis is very real for families in this locality, in Kirklees, in our own wards. And I understand the anxiety over rising prices and inflation. And we can argue about the reasons for that, and obviously I don't want to get into partisan politics. We know, though, we do know, and actually we do know one thing, that these events are being driven by global events, such as rising wholesale gas prices, provoked by surging demand after the pandemic, as well as Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And in my role as a councillor in Lindley, I was recently contacted by a constituent who was a single mother, and she was struggling financially, so she reached out to me. She wasn't able to pay her rent, she wasn't able to pay her bills, and she couldn't buy food for her family. As such, I referred her to the local welfare provision team, and she was given support by them through the £500 million Household Support Fund, which was launched by the government to help the lowest income households through these extraordinary times. Now, obviously, the government have done a whole host of other measures. They've reduced the universal credit taper, they've increased the national living wage, the frozen fuel duty, and these are all welcome measures, and we're looking forward to the measures that are going to be announced tomorrow by the new Prime Minister, and we look forward to those. I also welcome the government have already made a number of measures, £37 billion to support people with the cost of living, including £400 energy bill rebate, £150 council tax rebate, which will be paid to most households. A £650 payment is available for those on lower incomes, and £300 for pensioners, and £150 for those on disability benefits. But just on the £150 council tax rebate, I know that some people locally have had to jump through hoops to get that, particularly those people who don't actually pay council tax because they are exempt. So they are council tax residents, but they don't actually pay because they've got an exemption. I'm concerned that those people haven't had support quick enough, and I'd love to know if the council could focus some energy onto moving credits on their bills into cash in their actual bank on that front. Obviously, in summary, there is a lot of good work being done locally, and I'd like to thank the government for the pragmatic and actually non-ideological approach that they've taken to driving out support for people across the country, such as through that Household Support Fund. And finally, I'd like to pay tribute to the swift help and hard work that the Kirklees local welfare provision team have done through helping my constituent and other people in need. It's been much appreciated, and I thank them for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gregg. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this cost of living crisis needs to be addressed as a whole system challenge. It isn't just about this council, it's much, much wider than that. And I suppose I want to make a point of every year there are a number of deaths from people because people live in cold homes. The prediction for this winter is 360,000 deaths, which is shocking and tragic and far higher than perhaps in some previous years. And if you put it in context about the sad number of deaths because of COVID, somewhere at the height of it, around about 200,000, 360,000 deaths because of cold homes. It really is that serious. And it was something we discussed yesterday at the West Yorkshire Health Partnership Board, and certainly it was agreed that this was a whole system challenge. I think for me, a key thing is every organisation needs to focus on do no harm. Don't alter situations, services, appointments and so on, probably for very good reasons, saving money, etc., where it's likely to harm those who are already in need. Changing an appointment, changing times, days, where you go for help, etc., can have a huge impact on somebody, perhaps who has work commitments, caring commitments, childcare commitments. So I think all the time, as an organisation, we need to look at what we plan and what we're doing to avoid negative impact. in these challenging times, I do think it's essential, and I would say this as a very elderly and retired welfare rights worker, but it is about maximising people's income where it's possible, minimising outgoings, and where we can't do either of those things, where there are essentials, we should provide them where we can for those who are in need, where it would be otherwise unachievable. However, I think, my opinion is, we really need frontline workers in the council, in health, in education, in partner organisations, in the community and voluntary sector, to have a curiosity to identify need. And in identifying need, they need a system of positive referral. And really, it's touching on what Councillor Cooper was saying about what the heck, how do people access like benefits advice or anything else. I think there needs to be a system of positive referral, not where somebody says, oh, here's the phone number of the CAB, or here's the phone number of this organisation that will help you, or here's the email address, or here's the location address. Because actually, when you're under pressure and really struggling, those are things that are really difficult to follow up. We should have a positive system of referral where those frontline workers actually know that something can happen in a positive way for those people. I think never than ever before we need an embedded welfare rights system across our authority. And my last point is, although it has to be recognised that this council, like every other organisation and employer, will be facing increased costs with reduced income. So we're not going to be able to do everything. And that's going to be really difficult for us. But we also, and I think Councillor Davies touched on it, talked about it, we need to recognise that the voluntary and community sector will provide a lot of key activities for our residents. I think about the food banks, the baby bank, uniform exchange and so on, will also be under the cost, will be under pressure financially and struggling to cope. And wherever we can, we need to help and support them. I look forward to what the Prime Minister is going to offer. And I think this issue is a discussion that we should continue to have at council after council, because it isn't going to be a simple fix, and we need to work through it and make really tricky and difficult decisions for the benefit of our residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Councillor John Lawson, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The description of the key discussion in the agenda simply states cost of living crisis and the impact it is having on communities in Kirklees. It is, of course, much wider reaching than that, and we understand that some of the forces of work are outside our control, but some are not. It's difficult to keep all the moving parts in view, but I trust that the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee have a weather eye on the risk register, which is, that's our weather belt to see which direction we're going. Something that used to come to corporate scrutiny, but has been dropped recently, and it's something I wonder if Councillor Taylor might be interested in bringing back for a periodical report. We'll talk later. I can see there's something on your lips there. So, at a local level, to those of us who are involved in food banks, the impact of the cost of living crisis is all too clear. The numbers are ticking up alarmingly, but there are another couple of patterns emerging in the requests for help. The demographic of the people requesting help is changing. There are more young families, more people in work, more self-employed people. Generally, there are more people than ever who did not expect to see themselves using these services. Another is that people are using what is in the end a crisis service, and they are needing that help for longer. So they're coming back again and again and again. Now, all the food banks that I've come across have specific policies about not creating dependency but bridging times of crisis. Food banks are now being put in the terrible position of saying no to more and more distressed people and managing those people's situations and signposting other help that might be available. Now, these are volunteers. These are people who really, really care about what they're doing, and they are not qualified to be in this position. And I can't begin to tell you the effect that it has on them, on that staff, especially when the same people are referred straight back a week later. And that really needs sorting out. So the council has its role to play here, of course, which with effective communication with the third sector when it's doing its own referrals and its support in terms of its own assets and even officer time and anything else we can think of course, that is doable. Food banks, of course, are just one very visible aspect of this universal issue. Businesses are threatened with closure, councils are struggling to maintain services, and schools in some parts of the country are considering 3-day weeks. That's very stark to think about that happening. While we're on schools, Liberal Democrat questions to schools in Batley and Sven about the implementation of recent school uniform legislation got mixed responses. I wonder if it's worth council reminding schools in our borough of their obligations. What seems like incidental costs, a school uniform, especially once that's in the distant memory, like me. I wonder if it's worth, though, just reminding people that those incidental costs, seemingly incidental costs, can be a really heavy burden, especially when you're concertina together at the beginning of the school year. Council also has another role, and that's to lobby government. At Cabinet, I've asked for progress from the leader following the cost of living crisis motion passed at Council. Councillor Pandor was quite right in his last response when he said at the time that we did not have a functioning government. Hopefully that will improve, maybe. But I do wonder what he meant by he had to be careful, and this is a matter of record, it's on the video, and that perplexed me. I repeat what I said at the time, that as a leader you have a unique role in representing nearly 500,000 people to government, and that voice should be loud and it should be clear. Residents should be in no doubt whose side you are on. We might hear about warm bags today, well in fact we have, haven't we, or warm places, and I don't want to do that idea down. And I can see that in passing those spaces as temporary spaces might be very useful. But I have a number of questions. Can people afford to get to and from them? Is it safe for vulnerable people to be outside in that kind of cold weather if they need that kind of service? And people will still need to cook and sleep at home. Leaving your home unheated.
Councillor Lawson, you've got 30 seconds.
And then trying to take it back to temperature again is not the advice given about efficient heating. Just things to think about when you're thinking all this through. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your presentation, Councillor Davies. I'm a tea drinker. I buy boxes of tea bags that usually have 250 in. Approximate cost £4.50. I called in at my supermarket at the weekend. My usual box is now priced at £8.35. This is just to put this into context of what this actually means. It seems that from now on, even having a cuppa will be a luxury in the new normal. According to media reports, inflation is predicted to remain high for the next 2 years. It is therefore vital that this government and the council have robust plans in place which must be sustainable in the long term. And we have to look at this in the longer term because the drivers, because much depends on the drivers as to what actually happens with this cost of living crisis. During the COVID pandemic, mutual aid groups were formed. Volunteers helped. They helped collect and deliver prescriptions. They did shopping for people who were unable to go out. There was a great community spirit, and it was an effective means of helping people. Can we set up a similar type of framework where we get the community involved, helping everybody? Because we're all in this together in so many ways. We're now facing a situation, it's not heat or eat, it's actually freeze and or starve. So students, do we have a plan? Are we working collaboratively with the University of Huddersfield? Lots of students struggle in normal times. You know, do they have the information where they can go to food banks or access cheap food? Many of them have taken jobs in bars, cafes, restaurants and pubs to supplement their meagre finances. What happens if that part-time job finishes due to the crisis because the business has to fold? Will they be forced to return home, commute, or even give up their degrees? We need to be looking at how we can support them and work collaboratively with the university on this. Businesses, what are we doing to help businesses? Do we have a plan to help them with spiralling costs? Mental health. People are going to suffer with anxiety and depression during this crisis. They will feel some poor people will feel they cannot cope. Do we have a plan to help people? Some wraparound care that we can use to support people. In Almonbury, we're working with the churches, we're setting up a hub. We're going to try and get volunteers who work in different fields to come and provide support. We can provide, we'll have a central hub that people will know about where they can access food, where they can access advice, where they can hopefully get that wraparound care that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Struggling families are forced to choose between eating or heating, and food banks are stretched to a breaking point. This government should be hanging their heads in shame. The government is so out of touch, ministers don't understand because they're not like everyone else. The cost of living crisis is down to political choices and political chaos. The government choosing not to increase taxes on the wealthiest. The government stubbornly refuses to increase capital gain tax, choosing instead to hike national insurance, a tax on working people. But those who get their income from stocks, on shares or buy-to-let properties pay nothing more. Instead of making political choices to help the less well-off, the government happy to let those who unshamefully profit from the rising costs of fuel and energy bills. If the government were serious about giving everyone a pay rise to help ease the financial pain of soaring inflation, it could bring in a windfall tax on the indecent profits made by these companies who blatantly exploited the current economical crisis. We need to look at other countries in Europe who have capped their prices too. France has stepped up its game at the source, forcing the state-owned energy provider EDF and forcing to limit electricity wholesale prices to 4% for a year. Like Italy, Spain and others have decided to tax those energy companies profiting from the increase in energy prices and use the money raised to help its citizens pay bills. Spain has already cut value-added tax, VAT, on energy bills from 21% to 10%, while also cutting on existing tax on electricity from 7% down to 0.5%. The government should follow in suit of some of the EU countries and their government's effort to cap the rise in energy prices. Food banks are at all-time high, from over 32 million food banks since 2010, and each day they are growing, with their services stretching within how much they can provide for people struggling financially. We as councillors have a right to report these matters to our MPs, who can raise this in Parliament. As we have seen from 2010, our council budget gets slashed year after year. It leaves us to make difficult choices to serve the residents of Kirklees. And to leave on a final remark, just to remind Councillor Gregg that for the last 12 years, it's been Conservative in power, not Labour. Thank you.
Councillor Anthony Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to start by addressing some of the broad strokes of where we are today. Councillor Taylor opened his piece by saying that this debate was at the wrong time because we were still to hear from the incoming Prime Minister about the measures being taken to mitigate the energy prices. Well, I would just say, Mr. Taylor, that the government could have acted sooner. The two candidates for Prime Minister could have got their heads together with the current administration and give us all certainty well before this point in time. And also that energy only represents one piece of this ever more complicated and depressing puzzle. What we are effectively seeing is the biggest transfer of wealth from ordinary hard-working people into the hands of a few execs and shareholders that we have ever seen. Energy company profits in the UK today, it was reported, could be as high as £170 billion already. So to address something Councillor Gregg said, to say that the government have taken a non-ideological position, for them to rule out clawing back some of that money from windfall taxes, excess profits, profiteering, call it what you want, is obscene and ideological. What the government are, in fact, I think going to propose is giving us some welcome help to both struggling members of the public and struggling businesses in the way of either providing loans to the energy providers or direct support to us. But rather than bringing that back from the people who are profiteering, they're going to offer to pay that debt back from taxpayers' pockets over the next 10 years. The situation is obscene and ridiculous. Just also coming back to another point Councillor Taylor made, and that this energy crisis is caused by the actions of Putin, which the global market is no doubt impacted significantly by that. However, I don't think that's the full picture. I think a few years ago there was a slogan which something like went something like, "Let's take back control." What I would suggest is that we take back control of our energy supply and our broken energy market. At the moment, more than 50% of our electricity is produced from sources which are not gas. Yet the price of electricity is pegged to gas, which is artificially and insanely high. That can be fixed immediately, surely. Around about 60% of our oil and gas requirements come from the North Sea. Those gas fields and oil fields are mined and extracted under licence by these huge companies that are making these obscene profits. Why can we not take control of our own supplies of oil and gas and sell it back into the domestic market at prices that reflect the cost of production plus a reasonable profit? And there's going to be all sorts of things said about, well, we can't do that because of global markets X, Y, Z. We are in extraordinary times and it requires extraordinary measures. Let's fix the problem at source and control what we can control and make the damn stuff cheaper in the first place. That will then, in an instant, wipe out one of the biggest drivers of inflation, which is energy costs. The cost of energy is one of the biggest drivers of inflation at this point. And if the government was serious about getting inflation under control, they would tackle this and tackle this properly and leave their ideological ideas on the table. That's all I'm going to say on the broad strokes and the mess we're in with energy at the moment. I've got 36 seconds. What I want to say is... Some of the things that we're doing in Lindley is the local councillors have been working as ever with local residents, local groups, local businesses to raise cash, to provide hot meals, to provide emergency relief for people through the Lindley Food Bank drive and signpost people. I would just like to part by saying that we had a really great idea, or the council had a really great idea during the COVID crisis where they set up a COVID helpline. Let's do the same thing for this current crisis and set up a hotline where we can signpost people correctly.
Councillor Lukic.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try to be quick. I want to help others get in, and I want to keep the focus local. Thank you, Councillor Hall. In Dewsbury, there have been valuable conversations going on between third sector partners about the kinds of needs people are going to present with more complex than they were before, how they can cooperate and make sure they streamline their work efficiently so there's not duplication of effort going to helping the same people and things like that. I want to thank our places officers who've offered assistance with producing support cards. As part of that, I want to focus on energy saving tips being distributed more widely. I'll get onto that in a sec. I want to agree with Councillor Cooper. We need to really look at heating the person to help people save on their central heating. They can run it lower and focus more on heating themselves. I did raise this at the last council and separately to Cabinet, but have not had a response, which is disappointing when we're in a sort of an emergency planning phase. I do feel very strongly everyone in Kirklees needs to be properly informed on how they can save energy without upfront costs, because there is a range of things that everyone can do to help reduce the amount of central heating, or the amount of heating demand they actually have, or to help their heating systems run more efficiently. For example, if they've got condensing boilers, running it on a lower output setting for longer periods of time can save on energy consumption. Setting thermostats 1 or 2 degrees lower, radiator stats, things like that. Making sure your radiators are bled so they're outputting as much heat as they can. Taking slightly shorter showers, using full loads with washing machines and dishwashers, using eco mode with appliances like washing machines. The fastest mode is often the worst mode for energy, sort of counterintuitively. These are things that every resident really should be properly informed about to get everyone sort of winter ready in this crisis. And there's little 5-minute, 10-minute checkups people can do in their own homes. And I really think we should be doing everything we can as a council to encourage residents to do that. Thank you. Oh, and maybe those with links to government can help to encourage a national public information campaign to help with energy conservation. Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins. You'll just have to wait, we just lost you.
I don't know where he is. You got me now? Yeah?
No.
Yes. Good. Thank you. So just 40% on the brink or in poverty at the moment, right now in Kirklees. It's a stark figure, and I think we really need to bear that in mind in all that we do in this chamber. We've seen in Dalton, we have the Bread and Butter project, and this has been rolled out elsewhere in Kirklees, where it's a sort of low-priced weekly shop initiative. I hope the council will try and roll that out further across Kirklees. It's proven very successful and has had an uptake from all people from all walks of life who've been coming along to participate in the Bread and Butter project. I've also been going around the various third sector groups we have in Kirklees. I've visited the Welcome Centre, Uniform Exchange, Kirkwood, Local Services to You, Aspire, many more who are doing brilliant work across Kirklees and who are going to be also impacted by this cost of living crisis. And I would ask that the council does what it can to support those. They have been doing an amazing job so far supporting them, and I hope they will continue through this crisis as well. Because it's 80%, well, as sort of Councillor Davies highlighted, 80% potentially facing fuel poverty in 2022 in Britain. Just a trigger warning for Councillor Gregg. I'm about to go very partisan here. I hope he doesn't mind. But Liz Truss has promised immediate intervention tomorrow. Later in the meeting, Conservative councillors have brought forward a motion where they suggest that we write to the Secretary of State about speeding. But at the last meeting, they said that the Secretary of State would not listen to any pleas we made on the cost of living crisis. It's amazing how things have changed in just a few months. And that's the message that this current government is giving that 80% potentially facing fuel poverty. That for 12 years and today, the government doesn't give a damn. People don't graft enough. They should instead buy new kettles and put foil behind the radiators. It's shameful, and once again, we must do better. But something we cannot lose sight of, Andrew Cooper laid out a number of measures that we could do as a local council, but if he will note from the minutes that we have all received for this meeting, the financial situation this council is in and facing many councils across this country. The best thing that Liz Truss can do tomorrow, one of the best things, should I say, Liz Truss could do tomorrow in her announcement, is properly fund local government. Thank you.
I'm going to really close the list and get Councillor Davies to reply to all those items. I did say 8:05, and we've had a good debate on this discussion, and I know there's loads of people that want to be speaking, but I'm afraid, sorry. But Would you like? Yeah, please. Thank you. Councillor Smith, I did say I was going to finish at 8. Well, we've had the 60 minutes debate, Councillor Smith. You could have put your name earlier on. Thank you. Councillor Davies. There you are. Councillor Smith, Councillor Smith, Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it would be good if we'd had longer, but we did. Unfortunately, it was an hour. And I look forward to having certainly more conversations with members after this meeting. It should not be just a conversation that we hold in this chamber. Please come to me with ideas and thoughts on the issues that we've raised already. I think a number of things have been raised, and I am going to focus locally. I'll talk, when we come to the MTFS, a little bit more about national issues. The idea that we're looking at certainly incorporate many of the things that people have talked about. Councillor Cooper talking about the keeping the individual warm, not the place. That certainly is the feedback from our partners and the discussions we've already been having. And that, that is something that we are certainly taking on board and what we can do to support that as well. In terms of Councillor Kendrick's view about the curiosity of our frontline staff, I think that's absolutely valid and key. What we are trying to develop more and more is that ability for our frontline staff to ask the right questions, to feel self-assured enough to start having conversations whereby they can direct and help people. And that is part already of our access strategy and plans, and it's something we've got to build on. I completely agree with that. There were comments certainly about long-term from Councillor Munro, and again, completely agree. And as I referred to in the presentation, this is not just about the short-term action. This is about what we as a council can do to create opportunities, economic opportunities for our people going forward, so that we can help prevent some of the problems they face in the future. Let's look at where we are. In the last 15 years, I think I raised in the previous council meeting, the stagnation and the fall in reality of people's living standards and incomes. We're not starting from a position of strength. We're starting from a position of weakness. So as a council, we can't mitigate all of that, but certainly what we can do is have the ambition to create those economic opportunities within our communities, and we'll see that through our investments going forward. Certainly, I think the key to this is about our communities as well. It is about creating those partnerships. It is about helping to create resilience. And yes, it is about invoking to some extent the same spirit within the pandemic, but things have changed. We must remember, and this is the feedback we get all the time from our voluntary sector, there was a very different situation where there were plenty of people at that time who could volunteer and support. There's huge pressure now in terms of the voluntary sector and achieving that. So I absolutely agree with the idea, and I think it's something that we can invoke, and there are people out there who are prepared to do that, but we have to find ways of supporting our third sector and our voluntary sector for them to be able to support our communities as well. So I think in terms of what has been a relatively limited discussion, I'm really pleased to hear some of the constructive and positive contributions. I would absolutely encourage anybody to have that discussion with me as the portfolio holder, and certainly in terms of the teams that are working on this, they would be very open as well to have those discussions. We certainly don't feel that we have 10
seconds, Councillor Davies.
So once again, thanks for the opportunity for for this debate, and I agree this should not be a one-off. We need to be looking at how we carry this on ongoing.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Councillor Davies. I'm mindful of time as well, and we've got to get items 10 and 13 through, 10 to 13, sorry. Items 10 to 13 on the agenda. So item 10, we're going back to, which is page 117, Council Budget Strategy Update 23-24, and for future years referenced from Cabinet, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Councillor Davis.
Sorry, yep.
Opportunity for members, if they want to contribute, to come to.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Davies.
As we said, we've just completed a discussion around the cost of living crisis, and we've talked about the devastation and the stress and the issues that our households are facing within Kirklees. But its effect on public services is just as significant, and obviously on this council. So tonight's budget strategy that's before you is one of the ways we're managing our response to the crisis. It sets out a variety of pressures the council faces in the current year and the outlook for future budgets. I urge all members to absorb the details, sobering though many of them are. And to help that process, I will briefly take members through some of the key points. We're expecting to see further and significant increases in inflation over the coming months. And every time I see a prediction, it becomes increasingly frightening as to the levels it could go to. This means a knock-on effect and an impact on interest rates, on pay awards and costs of goods and services across the council. The largest of these pressures, of course, will continue to be energy, and to date, we clearly have no view about what government assistance there could be, or maybe will be, to help us with that. And certainly the way costs continuing to spiral into 2023 are again extremely serious. I can't emphasise how volatile the situation is in terms of energy costs. Every time I sit down to look at numbers, there are changes. And I'll say now that the numbers you see in the MTFS in terms of projected deficits are what we see at the moment, and don't be under any illusions that those are static. There is a real chance that they will increase, and that number will increase. And just to emphasise, and I'm sure you've picked this up from the report, our budget gap, our forecast for the next financial year has now moved to over 40 million. So it's 40.3 million. And the ongoing years, as you clearly will understand, increasingly worsen. It means we need to take management action now to mitigate these pressures in year, in both revenue and capital items. And we will need to use reserves to offset some of the unforeseeable costs we've experienced in recent months. And I have to remind members that it wasn't so long ago we were having a debate and a discussion where certain members were telling us that we had too many reserves and we should be spending them. Thankfully, this administration continued to operate in a prudent manner whereby we have enough reserves to safeguard our services to our citizens going forward for at least the coming period. Though, again, be under no illusion, that is not sustainable. And just because there's an inflation crisis, it doesn't mean other problems have disappeared. And the government, well, if there was a government in the last 6 weeks, admitted that it hasn't really devoted that much attention to the cost of living crisis while it sorted out this leadership election. And hopefully, and it's good to hear, the new Prime Minister will come up very quickly with some solutions to certainly support the households within the next few days. But there's absolutely no doubt and widely recognised this government has been asleep at the wheel on a range of other issues that affect this strategy. We were promised a solution to the crisis in social care funding. Where
30 seconds, Councillor Davies.
We are nowhere. Nothing has materialised. We remain one of the worst funded authorities, and we wait patiently along with other councils of all political stripes to hear what we will get in terms of settlement. So my message is simple to this new government. This autumn's local government settlement is your chance to get a grip on the cost of living crisis. It's your chance to show you really care about places like us and the people who live here. If you believe in fairness,
thank you, Councillor Davies.
Funding.
Thank you. Is that?
I have to recommend, I would like to recommend on paragraph 6 that Cabinet's recommendations be approved by Council.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Councillor Pando.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to support Councillor Paul Davies' recommendation and reserve the right.
Are there any comments on this matter? Councillor Bolt.
At last, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Oh, it takes some doing. I'd like to start by thinking about the wise words of President John F. Kennedy. Something quite topical, Mr. Mayor. The time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. That's something that members may be aware of when they leave the chamber, and will reflect on it, Mr. Mayor. But in, still coming through the roof, in setting the council budget strategy, we must consider how things are being managed in the authority. And in doing so, we can take time to reflect on some items which we may have spoken on before had not the leader censored us. In setting the budget strategy, Mr. Mayor, members of the public may well want to know why a contract for a new leisure centre in Spen Valley needs a retrospective financial approval for a contract. It says to meet contractually bound payments. If you sign a contract, you know how much you're paying at the start. You don't get into a retrospective agreement when it's up and running, unless it's something that you didn't foresee, in which case, looking at your budget strategy, you would look at that and see how you could overcome that. You may also, and as somebody, Mr. Mayor, again, I have to say, as somebody who, for the last 30 years, hasn't been living in Huddersfield, brought my family up and worked in Huddersfield, the majority of Kirklees residents would ask, why do we need another £350,000 borrowing for the George Hotel when this council has not had a business case put for it that we as a council could consider? So we'd have to ask, Mr. Mayor, in the term of this item, when we are setting the budget strategy, why have we got unforeseen problems? Who's managing it? We'd also need to look at the efficiency of the council. Earlier on, Mr. Mayor, I returned to officers 2 identical public packs of paper for a scrutiny meeting, which was sent through the Royal Mail, but because the administration has moved us from having internal mail, who would have left those papers at the rear of our house for collection, they were taken to the Royal Mail sorting office, along with another 2 identical sets of confidential papers. The bundle which I've had to bring back in for safe recycling and destruction was about that big, Mr. Mayor. How much is that costing to send through the Royal Mail and for the duplicate? So we look at the efficiency of the council, Mr. Mayor. There's been talk about cost of living. This council could have helped many people with cost of living 20-odd years ago. We were promised a combined heat project. That's only just starting to come on stream. we're now told that it's not going to heat many of the homes in the immediate area of their incinerator. So the people who've suffered for the last 20-odd years having the incinerator near them are not going to benefit. The budget strategy, looking at the cost of living, could also say, can the council look at setting up a community energy company where we can... No, I know, they'll catch on eventually, Andrew. Well, so you learn from previous mistakes. The council could say, could we use redundant land
Councillor Cooper, can you let him finish?
renewable energy? But when we proposed that to officers that contaminated tips that they were supposed to develop 20-odd years ago that have lain waste, so let's put some photovoltaics on to produce energy for the local community. And we were told by Councillor Mather that ward members should be able to lead on things. So when ward members ask officers to work up a project on renewable energy, and we're told by officers no, then we reflect on the council strategy and about the efficiency. Talking of efficiency, Mr Mayor, and council budget strategy, we should be looking to protect our assets so that when ward members, who we're told by Councillor Mather, can instruct officers, can bring forward schemes, when ward members say to officers, we'd like to secure playing fields, public areas in Mirfield so they don't suffer illegal encampments which then cost money in the damage to the gates.
30 seconds, Councillor Bolt.
We will be told 2 years later that council officers dismissed it. So, Councillor Mather, will you as Cabinet Member tell the officers that they should be doing what you say and listening to ward members? Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If I may, I'll briefly begin with apologies and corrections from last council. I incorrectly stated that the Liberal Democrat group wasn't consulted over one of the items on the agenda. It was. I was in the land of Feverland and COVID, so I'm afraid I missed that. So I do believe, though, that officers' lives are hard enough right now. They are going to get harder. Sorry, officers. But when a member has made a mistake, he needs to hold his hand up and say so. So please file under apologies, corrections. So that said, I want to thank Eamon and the team for their work in trying to unscramble the current economic issues. That old corridor of uncertainty is now as wide as Headingley. We're in real uncertain fields here. Just a couple of things quick things to pick up in this report. First of all, we await what blessed relief will come to us from the Prime Minister Trust in terms of energy cost freezes, etc. First demanded, of course, by the Liberal Democrats, but that's only part of the story painted in the report. It quite rightly points out inflationary pressures in fuel and food. Add to that materials and replacement parts for everything from boilers to bin wagons and all points in between. And we see a picture that should really concern us over the coming months. I know Council zeroes in on balanced budgets as the year goes on, but the optimistic and pessimistic scenarios in Appendix E on page 179 have a budget gap ranging from 36.3 million to 55.2 million. And I think I'd like to know a little bit more about the trajectory on those figures and what we can expect to see over the next few months. I'm sorry to bring this up again, but I have brought it up in other areas. But with the cost of borrowing increasing, where do we stand with borrowing for the cultural heart and to a lesser extent the Gateway project? I agree that doing nothing isn't an option. We have to do something, and that's a given. I do understand that, and I'm on board with that. But there's a couple of reasons why I asked this question. One is our borrowing headroom in future years, up to 2027. Are we hamstringing future administrations in their borrowing capabilities when we consider them alongside our other capital commitments? The second question is one of really unfortunate timing, not of the administration's making, I'll hasten to add, but a critically unstable economic period following leaving Europe, the pandemic, the energy crises, and rising inflation. If we're heading into austerity 2.0, some hard choices are going to have to be made. Once your statutory obligations are squared away, are you thinking of them now, Are you thinking about what your priorities will be when those hard choices come? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor David Hall, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first bit of what I'm going to say actually is what I would have said under the last item, but it fits in very well with what we're discussing now. And that is that we were told, actually, earlier on in the evening, in Councillor Davis's first slide, that a very large population of Kirklees has a very low income, much too large a proportion, actually. And these are the people who are going to be most heavily affected by cost of living. So our first priority, I would have said, as a council, is to make sure that we go through our budget line by line and make sure that every pound we spend is being spent effectively on behalf of all residents. Make sure residents aren't paying a penny more in council tax that they have to pay. There's also in this report a mention of £55 million which the council collects, not in council tax, but in other fees and charges. So this ranges from your paying for your brown bin through to your planning permissions and your parking charges and everything else. And all this must be examined to make sure that those, not just at the bottom, but those just about managing and above, are all getting value for money from their council tax. And that's something we can do. That's something we have the power to do. Because we can spend a lot of time in this chamber saying, well, the government should do this and the government should then pub preaching like we've heard tonight. But actually that's not within our gift. So we must focus on the things that are within our gift, and that's something we can do, which will help everybody. So I'm pleased to hear that there will be that focus going on a line-by-line basis. Just turning to the report in front of us, there are two mentions in the recommendations of paragraphs in this report which I find hard to support. And these are paragraphs 1.9 and 1.10. The first one deals with the HRA. And there's mention in there that the government may introduce an allowable rent uplift. I don't know whether they will or whether they won't, but I think it's something that the Cabinet must consider very, very carefully before it goes along with, because the people that are paying the council tax rents are amongst our lowest earners, I would have thought. And I don't think we should be increasing the rents for our properties by a great amount, because that's just going to put more burden on them. And if we need to balance that HRA budget, we need to look for efficiencies in the delivery of the housing management function, which will be there. We can find those efficiencies. So I'm nervous about that, Mr. Mayor. And the other nervousness comes in following on from what Councillor Lawson has said about the cost of the capital plan. I'm still seeking assurances that what is put forward as a baseline capital plan is actually affordable. I don't think that's rocket science. We all know interest rates are still going up. I know to my cost, because I've just renegotiated a new mortgage, which is going to cost me a pretty penny. I'm amongst a lot of people that are going to face a lot of more money to spend. But those interest rates as well, we have to pay on what we borrow for the capital plan. And I think the interest rates are going to rise further. And I think this, we've said, is a moving feast. This is going to be refreshed about every week because of interest rates and decisions taken by people outside this chamber. So I'm nervous about the cost of the capital plan as well. And before I would support anything like that, I would want to seek more assurances that actually the baseline is affordable, never mind the uplift where rising interest rates may take us. So just finally to say, Councillor Davis mentioned about the local government settlement which will be due later in the year. I've met Simon Clark, who's the new Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government and Levelling Up. I found him to be a very decent person. He listened to what we've got to say. He found him to be a very honourable person. I know the LGA are lobbying like Billy-O for some of the things that have been discussed tonight. I'm sure he will listen, and I shall be talking to him as well before that to put some of the points across that we are making as a party, but also other parties are making about how we need to fund some of the pressures that are coming through from the council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I thank Councillor Davis for the budget strategy that is presented? I'd also like to thank Eamon and his team. We are in uncertain times, and I think across this chamber tonight, we are recognising we are in it. But I need to go back to my community, because it's the government that need to look at local government and how their funding criteria is. It's not a fair system. They've decimated Kirklees. They've left a huge crater in Kirklees funding. And all I can do tonight is appeal to them to relook at it. I'm not going to be repetitive, because I know a lot of people have said a lot of things tonight, which I totally agree with. But I will end it by saying tomorrow the new PM will come out dishing her Smarties. Perhaps 100 billion Smarties, we're not sure. But can I just give you a word of caution? Steer clear of the blue ones, because the additives in them will have far more implications in the future. So I want us to come together. It is about a cost of living crisis. We're trying the best we can. I've said it before, we've been left with rags. It's not cutting your cloth accordingly. We will be prudent, and it will require some cross-party working together in this. But I want to be supportive to my communities, and I know you all do. But as I say, caution, be very careful.
Councillor Andrew Marchington.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think we all agree that the Council's budget is going to be difficult, and more so than it has been for a long time. And we do need to think about carefully how the Council uses its resources and to maximise the benefit to our local residents. And perhaps some of it fits into the cost of living debate and user resources. I just want to be careful about some of the line-by-line stuff that we hear time and time, this forensic analysis of the Council's budget. Should the Council decide to put up the council tax by 4.99% next year on a banded property, you're talking about £100. I've done the calculations for our fuel, and we live in an average property. Should there not be adequate support announced by the Prime Minister tomorrow, on the 1st of October, our household fuel bills will go up by £1,000 for a year. So we need to put it in context. So I agree with Councillor Hall that we need to be using the funding efficiently, but this line-by-line stuff, we need to have a look at the big picture and how we're using that. Some of the points that Councillor Bolt was making about energy efficiencies, I think that our group would absolutely support it. It's disappointing that we're not accelerating the Huddersfield Heat Network, and I understand it's now the Huddersfield Energy Network. That was announced without any consultation at a cabinet meeting. And we know that Kirklees is an electricity generator. It uses gas to do that, because that happens at the same time as we incinerate stuff. And that heat, most of that heat goes up the chimney. It's not acceptable. And actually, perhaps the council could re-look at the numbers, because it has the resources to borrow, to invest. Yes, those borrowing costs are going up, but just looking at the current Public Work Loan Board funds, it's not, we can still borrow at 3.5% over a 10-year period. It actually drops over a longer period. So what do the numbers stack up like? And that's the thing the council can do in its, use the resources it can gain to actually benefit the whole of the borough. Because actually we could, we've got £4.5 million pressure on our own energy users. How much more could we be generating using that? Revisiting some of the things Kirklees used to do so brilliantly. That stage when Kirklees, I think, generated 5% or 10% of the whole of the PV electricity in the whole of the country. I think most of that was on Civic Centre 3. So should we be revisiting that? Because we can invest, and there's a cost to save. If we can generate and use electricity, and the cost of investment to do that is less than its cost to the buyers, we ought to be doing it. It's a no-brainer. It's a good investment if we have an appropriate business plan. So I think that's the sort of being creative. It's not about rearranging the decks or whittering about what the central government does or doesn't do, because it never does what we want it to do. It never funds local government enough until we have a fundamental change in how we, run the whole of, look at the economy. So there are things that we would want to see in terms of using the resources the council has to maximise the benefit to the 400,000+ people who live in Kirklees. Thank you.
Councillor Ponder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, thank you to Eamon, our Section 151 officer. He has been very diligent and very, very sort of like careful in terms of how we've been managing the budget. And Paul, thank you very much for your contribution as well. And I think, Mr Mayor, generally it's been a good debate. It's been very positive. One or two comments might not have sort of like striked with me, but I won't expect anything less from that particular councillor. But I think the line by line thing, I think David is spot on. We do need to look at stuff line by line. And the capital plan, I've also had a conversation with John outside the council that we do need to look at the capital plan and how things pan out. And I mentioned earlier, Mr Mayor, that when markets fail, government intervention is a must. And we know that there will be government intervention. I've actually messaged Simon Clark earlier on because, as you know, Dave, he was the minister responsible when we were doing the devolution deal, and he was very, very positive, and he did actually deliver what he said. And I'm hoping that I can connect with him again under his new role of Minister for Department of Levelling Up. But we are going to be prudent. We are going to be very, very careful. We will try and do everything we can to make sure that we actually monitor on a regular basis. And it's going to be tough. I'm hoping that the government intervention will focus on local government and on a cross-party basis, we can do a lot more just in case that we need to actually go down to Westminster and lobby government, and I'm happy to do that again. But once again, I appreciate the contributions. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to make a very quick statement to correct something Councillor Marchington just said. As I said at a recent scrutiny panel when we took the Huddersfield Heat Network to it, where it received significant cross-party support, we've made, in my view, more progress in the last 12 months than we have for the years that it's been talked about, and I'm very proud of that and the team that they've worked on it, on that. Unfortunately, it can't be accelerated because we are running at timescales and through gateways which are set by the government. So that isn't something that's in the council's control, but we have ambitious targets and we're moving at a great pace, and I hopefully look forward to being here when that's set up and still running.
I'm just mindful of time and agenda items that we've got. We've still got 3 key items on the agenda that I need to get through. So I'm closing the list on Councillor Simpson. I'm going to get Councillor Davis to reply to this, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'll try... Okay, somebody's just having a chat.
Continue, Councillor Davis.
I'm quite happy not to. You need...
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you hear me? Yes.
We're okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll certainly be brief because I think the leader's already summed up quite a number of the issues. But to emphasise, this is absolutely an ongoing issue, which is an issue which we will be addressing on far more regular basis than we have done in the past in terms of budgetary reports and in terms of reviewing where we're moving forward. There just seems to be lots of
Councillor Marchington, please. Thank you. Continue, Councillor Davies.
Okay. Everybody had their little chats. Good. All right. So the main message is, and I'll certainly echo some of the things that have already been said, is this will be something which all members will be briefed on and will have eyes on a far more regular basis than we've ever done in the past. Certainly, I wasn't around, in the days of austerity in that regard, but it's very clear that the position that we have in terms of our financial strategy is very volatile, and therefore,
Councillor Pinnock, please.
We'll be looking as much as possible to communicate in the best possible way so that all members have that view. In terms of some of the comments about efficiencies, you know, I do struggle a little bit when we get to discussing mail and various other things, when we're talking about huge increases in energy and 40 million deficits. It really is, seems to me, something I experienced a long time ago in my career, where people were looking at reducing the use of paper clips and various other things to save money. That will not work in that regard. And absolutely, we should be looking at efficiencies. And I can give you categoric assurance that each directorate is spending a significant amount of time at this moment looking at their budgets, looking at the efficiencies they have to achieve against targets already set and against what we are now facing. So certainly, I'd agree with the leader, as much cross-party discussion, support on this is essential going forward, in particular when it comes to lobbying. And I really welcome Councillor Hall's comments about the work he's doing in terms of lobbying ministers with regards to the local authority settlement going forward. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Davies. Show of hands for 4. Yeah. Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Strategy refresh reference. Councillor Kendrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be very brief with this, hopefully, in the interest of time. This is a refresh of the Kirklees Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy, which does need to be approved by the Health and Wellbeing Board. The information has been shared and feedback sought from a wide range of partner organisations online. It's been to directorate leadership teams, political groups, scrutiny and the Health and Wellbeing Board. And I think I am aware of the comments and suggestions that came back, and I think we have made a good attempt at accommodating those within the strategy as such. It is due to come to the Health and Wellbeing Board on the 22nd of September, and I will just suggest that we move to page 187, where the recommendations are that this council note and comment on the contents of the strategy, recognising that further minor amendments may be necessary to take account of feedback from council and other key partners, that it delegates authority to the Strategic Director of Corporate Strategy, Commissioning and Public Health to make any minor amendments which may be necessary to take into account that feedback, and to adopt the Joint Health and Wellbeing Strategy subject to the final approval of the Health and Wellbeing Board, because that will be the final decision maker in this. And that's all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Kendrick. Is that seconded?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to second that. Thank you.
Go to a vote. Show of hands. Those for? Thank you. Those? Any abstains? That's carried. Thank you. Item 12, Revised Gambling Policy, Statement of Principles, reference from Licensing and Safety Committee, page 215. Councillor Amanda Pinnock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that the revised gambling policy, Statement of Principles, as set out in Appendix 2 of the report, be approved to take effect for a period of 3 years from the 31st of September 2022. Is that seconded by one of my licensing colleagues?
Is that seconded?
Second that and reserve the right, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Marchington. Are there any comments on this matter? Councillor Bolt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm broadly supportive of this, but in making the choice to vote, Mr Mayor, we are given the information required to take a decision on page 216, part of which talks, Councillor Pinnock, about the consultation on the proposed policy. And I refer to the appendix in which that is included. I direct colleagues to page 225. Though amongst those consulted are local members of Parliament, ward councillors, area committees. And I thought, when did we abolish area committees, Mr Mayor? A while ago. Sister services, but it doesn't say what they refer to. So you look further into it, and two of the consultees who have helped influence this strategy are Yorkshire Forward and Yorkshire Culture. I believe, Councillor Pinnock, those were abolished on the 31st of March 2012. So could you tell me how many other non-existent organisations were consulted on this strategy?
Wait till the end. Wait till the end. Wait till the end.
Councillor Pinnock, do you want to wait till the end, please?
Councillor Marchington wanted to...
Councillor Marchington, it's your turn. No. Okay. Councillor Pinnock. Right.
Thank you, Councillor Bolt, for bringing those issues to my attention. If that's correct, then obviously there's been a major error there, so that will be taken up with the licensing department. So it's well noted. So thank you for that.
Thank you. We'll go to vote now, don't we? We'll now go to a vote. Show of hands for 4, please. Those against.
Councillor Mathers against.
Councillor Mathers, you against? Oh. She had her hand up. Abstains? No. That's carried. Thank you. Item 13, page 251, revisions to terms of reference of Health and Wellbeing Board, reference from Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will move that the revised terms of the reference of Health and Wellbeing Board be approved. Is that seconded?
Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Are there any comments? Councillor Reynolds.
It seems like a very small point in the huge discussion that's taken part today.
Councillor Reynolds, you need to stand up, please.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Does it not? I feel a bit taller now. It does feel like a very small comment, but can we just address the improving outcomes for children part of that revision? And I would like to see the addition of representatives within the school part of representatives on the actual board to include the mental health leads and the mental health strategy team that are part of the new work with children and mental health. Sorry, that didn't come out quite how I wanted to say it. I'd like to see the addition of the new posts of mental health leads and the representative from the mental health in schools team included in the membership of the board. Both will give valuable contributions to the board to update frontline needs in children's mental health with slightly different focuses. The mental health lead is usually an educationalist, but the mental health strategy worker will be very much an advocate for the children. This would ensure that the voice of the child will continue to be heard in both engagement and strategy. Thank you.
Right to reply, Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Your points have been noted and will be taken on. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to a vote. Show of hands for... Thank you. Those against? Any abstains? No. That is carried. Thank you. Item 14, page 265, report of members' allowance, independent review panel, reference from Corporate Governance and Audit Committee. Councillor Hussain.
We will move that the recommendation as set out on page 270, paragraph 6 be approved, and that the recommendation of the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee as set out at Appendix D, paragraph 6, 3, B refers, be approved.
Is that seconded? Are there any comments on this matter?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr.
Councillor
Mayor.
Panda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've distributed an amendment which is self-explanatory. I'd like to thank the independent review panel for all the hard work they've done and the time they spent. And I'd like to propose an option 3, Mr. Mayor. Delete everything on paragraph 6.3 and I agree the following. Approval be given to implementation of an annual increase for both the basic and SRA on a percentage basis in line with the agreed annual pay award for council employees. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I have a seconder for that? Any comments on that? Councillor Marchington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think all of us appreciate the work that the Independent Allowances Panel do and recognise the difficult work they have. And traditionally, we've accepted the recommendations that they've made without very little debate. And some of us were involved in providing evidence for this these particular recommendations. That was considerable time ago. I think some major evidence was collected last year. These recommendations were formulated in January, and circumstances have changed. And I think our group has thought about and debated this, and looking at the report that's presented, it's not just about an uplift in the allowances. There's actually some structural changes in there, and there's some really positives in there, particularly about actually shifting so councils are paying for their own broadband or for mobile phones and things like that, and that seems an absolutely appropriate thing to do. I mean, that actually saves council money. But we're concerned about just a straightforward uplift. And we think that it'd be actually better for this to be referred back to the independent panel to look at that, and for councillors to express the concerns they've expressed informally about this and about it, and for the independent panel to review what we've said and actually do that within the framework. I think do not think it's particularly appropriate just to do a blanket.
Can we have one discussion taking place, please? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marchington. Councillor Smith.
Proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to echo the comments of Councillor Marchington and also add that I think an uplift in the council's basic allowance to 18,000 is difficult. It's difficult. The optics are difficult. The actual amount is difficult for me to get my head around in these difficult circumstances that the council find themselves in, with all the pressures on budgets and all the pressures that ordinary people are facing. We're going to be who are being encouraged to take below inflation pay rises at this time, and I would, yeah. It doesn't sit very well with me. Let's put it that way. And I would rather have seen a much smaller increase in the council's basic allowance. And I agree with Councillor Marchington's comments on the structural changes, and would hope for maybe a referral back to the independent panel. But I thank everybody for the work on the report. Thank you.
I mean, I just want to remind members very quickly, I am going to close the meeting at 9, so please be very brief when you are speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be brief. I'm going to speak in favour of the amendment put forward by the leader, because I was quite shocked when I read this report originally, and it said that over the next 3 years we were going to give ourselves what amounted to a 30% pay rise. It seemed abhorrent to me morally, and I couldn't support it as a conscientious socialist. So I'm glad that we're putting forward an amendment for a principle that we can all stand behind, which is that our pay should go up at the same rate as the council employees' pay does. I think that's a principle that we can all establish, because it gives us as politicians an incentive to increase the pay of our employees, and it means that I can turn up on the picket line tomorrow morning with a straight face. So I would heartily recommend the amendment to the Chamber.
I'm just to let you know, I'm closing the list after John Lawson. Thank you. Hawkins, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, members. Again, I'll be swift as well, much like Councillor McLaughlin. I'll be supporting the amendment proposed by Labour and the leader here. We should be paid in line with the works of the council, no more, no less, and whom without we would not be able to do anything as councillors. This meeting has highlighted the challenges that we're all facing, that our residents are going to be facing, to in any way support the recommendation of the report. The hypocrisy would just be obscene. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think firstly as well to reiterate that we are grateful to the independent panel for the work that they do on our behalf. They've obviously put a lot of time into this. They took a lot of sounders, and a lot of us appeared in front of them to give them our views. They've obviously come up with quite a wide-ranging set of recommendations. It's almost a wholesale revamping of our whole allowances system. Unfortunately, it comes with a very high price tag. And for that reason, I agree with the leader, actually, that at this point we can't accept all that. I just don't. It's not because I'm a conservative socialist, and I'm not going to be on. And I'm not going to be on the picket lines tomorrow with my comrades. But having talked all evening about the pressures that people are under, not least councillors, we're only ordinary people like everybody else. I think it's right at this time that we actually don't accept all those recommendations and that we park them. There are things in there that are worthy to look at. I understand the reasons why they've been put forward, but just at this point, I would say that we can't agree to them. I have been saying for some time, and I've said for years and years, that the pay of councillors should be pegged to the civil servants, to the officers that we pay, because I think it's the most transparent way of saying, look, we're not going to vote every year to give ourselves thousands and thousands of pay rise. Let's wait till the national committees, you know, with their negotiations with the trade unions, they come out with a figure. Let's just ride on the same figure, because, you know, it just takes the whole sting out of the process. Let's be honest, residents don't like us having pay rises, and they never will. And if it was up to the residents, they'd never give us any pay at all. But we have to live in the real world, and actually I think this is sensible, and I would be supporting the amendment tonight.
Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree with much of that has been said about the original sort of report piece in front of us. We do have independent panels for a purpose. We should really be listening to them. However, most of the evidence gathered in this report was gathered some time ago. The world has turned, it's moved on. I moved on quite swiftly and quite dramatically at that. So, from what has been said about the original, that it's not acceptable, with a kind of a sigh, I say to the independent panel, thank you very much for your work. It's much appreciated. We know how much hard work you put in. I know I gave evidence and they had to listen to me. That's hard work. But that said, if we're not going to do that, that's in this book here, we should be sending it back with recommendations. We should not doing this. We should not be taking a narrow, slim piece of paper with no figures on it for the public. It's an insult to the public. That's my opinion on this, is that to do that is a blank check. And we don't know what's on it. The public doesn't know what's on it. We should not be doing this. It should be going back to the independent panel.
Councillor Panda, you'd like to reply?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Just to be absolutely clear, the option we have put forward is the least expensive. The one that the independent review panel put forward would have cost a lot of money. The one that the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee... Mr. Mayor, can I...
Please,
given
thank
the
you.
benefit, I didn't interrupt anybody
Thank
else.
you.
The one that the Corporate Governance and Audit Committee recommended, that will still cost more than what the option I put forward. That is the least costly option that put forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Panda. We're now voting on the amendment. Can show of hands for 4. Yeah. Can everybody be quiet, please?
Yeah. Tell them again. They need to sit
Okay,
down
can
in
I...
their seats.
Yes, sir.
Just will you get them to be quiet?
Yeah. Can everybody sit down and be quiet, please? Thank you.
Okay, because this is a recorded vote, and I'm told that when we did the recorded vote previously, it was quite hard to hear what everybody said. I've been asked to ask you to switch your microphone on when you're speaking and off. Either that or speak very loudly, please, so it can be picked up and properly recorded, okay? So maybe stand up and project. Or I can come round with the microphone, maybe, I don't know. Okay, that will take for ages. Okay, I'm going to go through the list. Listen out for your name. Either speak very loudly or put your microphone on so it can be heard and recorded properly. All right? Okay, so Councillor Pandor. Yes. Councillor Hall. Councillor Lawson. John Lawson.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Against.
Councillor Greaves. Councillor Ahmed.
For.
Councillor Allison. Councillor Anwar.
For.
Councillor Armour.
For.
Councillor Bamford.
For.
Councillor Bolt.
For.
Thank you. Extremely. Councillor Burke. Councillor Burke. Councillor Butt. Thank you. Councillor Crook. Councillor Dadd. Councillor Paula Davies. Councillor Paul Davies.
For.
Councillor Donald Firth. Councillor Eric Firth. Councillor Gregg. Councillor Hall. Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Holmes. Councillor Holmes. Councillor Homewood.
For.
Councillor Hussain. Councillor Cowshick. Councillor Kendrick.
4.
Councillor Khan.
4.
Councillor Joe Lawson. Councillor Lee Richards. Councillor Lees Hamilton. 4. Councillor Lunat.
Make a point of order, Mr. Mayor.
There's lots of noise.
It's now after 9 o'clock, and you said you were closing the meeting at 9 o'clock.
It is up to me, Councillor Smith. Thank you.
The standing orders actually include a provision to continue until the matter's been finished. So let's finish the vote. Okay. So I think I was on Councillor Lunat, Councillor Lowe, Councillor Lukic.
Against.
Councillor Marchington. Against. Councillor Mather. Councillor McGrath. Councillor McGuinn. Councillor McCarthy.
4.
Councillor McLaughlin, if I've not read out your name already. Okay, thank you. Councillor Monroe.
Against.
Councillor O'Donovan. Councillor Pattison.
4.
Councillor Purveyes. Councillor Amanda Pinnock. Councillor Andrew Pinnock.
Against.
Councillor Kath Pinnock. Councillor Ramsey. Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Sarwar. Councillor Scott. Councillor Sheard. Councillor Simpson. Excellent, thank you. Councillor Smage. Councillor Anthony Smith. Councillor Richard Smith.
4, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It's appreciated.
You're more than welcome. Councillor Sokol. Councillor Stephen. Councillor John Taylor. Councillor Turner. Councillor Uller. Councillor White. Councillor Adam Zaman. Councillor Habiban Zaman. Okay, that's the end of the list.
The amendment. Please, quiet, please. Yeah. Yeah. The amendment has been carried. Was it? 50-14. We need to still vote on the substantive motion as well. Please show hands for this one. Those for? Those against? Any abstain? That's carried. Close the meeting. Thank you ever so much and enjoy the rest of the evening.